In front of the entire executive board, my colleague stood under the projector lights and presented my year of grueling labor as his own brilliant idea. I stood in the dark corner of the room, reduced to nothing more than his slide clicker. I said nothing. Then the CEO raised his hand, pointed at the screen, and asked a single question that made the temperature in the room drop. Who built the original model? My colleague froze. He stammered frantically, searching for a lie. He did not realize the CEO already had the answer staring back at him from his tablet. The boardroom on the 40th floor of Sterling Financial felt like a glass cage. Brad stood at the head of the mahogany table wearing a tailored navy suit and a smile that reeked of unearned confidence. He tapped his laser pointer against the screen, highlighting the risk forecasting algorithm I had named Apex. I had spent 6 months writing every sequence, sacrificing sleep and my own health to perfect it. Brad told the investors he had conceptualized the entire architecture over a weekend. He snapped his fingers at me without looking in my direction. "Next slide, Evelyn." I pressed the button. My throat felt like sandpaper. The humiliation burned in my chest, but I kept my face blank. Brad paced the room, tossing out buzzwords he barely understood. He soaked up the approving nods from the New York investors. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried me. Then Mr. Sterling, the firm founder and CEO, held up a hand. The room fell silent. Sterling leaned forward, his piercing gray eyes locked onto Brad. "The algorithm structure is impressive," Sterling said, his voice flat. "But the core regression logic seems highly specialized. Did you build this original model yourself, Brad?" Brad swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. He opened his mouth to spin another fabrication, unaware that an anonymous tip containing the true server logs had landed in the CEO inbox hours ago. "To understand why I let him dig his own grave in front of the most powerful men in the city, you have to go back 72 hours to the morning." He pushed me off a cliff. "My name is Evelyn. I am 31 years old and I work as a senior data analyst in Chicago. Before I tell you how a single line of hidden code destroyed a man and saved my sanity, take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments so I know where you are watching from." The silence on the 40th floor at 6 in the morning usually brought me a sense of peace. The only sounds were the low hum of the overhead ventilation and the faint hum of the city waking up far below the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat alone in the dim glow of my dual monitors, a lukewarm cup of black tea resting near my keyboard. My fingers flew across the keys, tightening the final neural network loops for the Apex project. This algorithm was my lifeline. It was a predictive risk model designed to identify market vulnerabilities faster than any existing software in the financial district. I had poured 6 months of my life into it, working through weekends, holidays, and the exhausting weeks following my heart surgery. I initiated the final sequence to compile the source code. A loading bar appeared on the screen, inching toward completion. My chest tightened with a familiar dull ache right beneath my surgical scar, but I ignored it. I was minutes away from securing a patent submission that would guarantee my promotion and pay off the mountain of medical debt suffocating me. The progress bar froze at 99%. A harsh red dialog box snapped onto the screen. "Access denied. Administrator privileges required." I frowned, leaning closer to the monitor. I tapped the escape key and re-entered my credentials. The system rejected my password. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I opened the main server directory to check the network permissions. The root folder for Apex, a directory I had created and maintained, no longer listed my employee identification number as the owner. The ownership tag had been transferred. The new administrator was listed as Bradley Vance. The heavy glass door at the end of the corridor swung open, the click of the latch echoing through the empty department. Leather dress shoes approached with a slow, deliberate rhythm on the carpet. Brad strolled into the gray light of the cubicle rows, carrying an iced caramel macchiato. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking as though he had slept 8 hours and woken up to a personal chef. He did not look like a man who had spent the night wrestling with complex data structures, because he had not. He stopped right behind my chair. He took a long, noisy sip from his plastic cup, the ice rattling. He reached over my shoulder and dropped a thick stack of printed presentation slides onto my keyboard. The heavy paper slapped against the plastic keys. I changed the network permissions overnight. Brad said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. I routed the main directory through my executive access portal. I stared at the printed slides covering my keyboard. The title page featured the Apex logo I had designed, but right below it, the text read, "Lead Architect Bradley Vance." My name was nowhere to be found. You locked me out of my own project. I kept my voice steady, though my hands began to tremble. I wrote every line of that code, Brad. You do not even possess the clearance to understand the risk vectors I mapped. Brad chuckled, a low, patronizing sound that grated against my ears. He leaned his hip against my desk, crossing one leg over the other. Evelyn, let us be realistic. This project has grown too large for a mid-level analyst. The board of directors needs a face they can trust, someone with executive presence and leadership acumen. I will be presenting Apex as the lead director. You will be listed in the appendices as my technical assistant. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The wheels caught on the carpet. You are stealing my intellectual property. I will take this straight to the managing partners. I will pull the version history logs and show them exactly who authored the system. Brad did not flinch. His smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He set his coffee cup down, leaned in, and planted both hands on my desk, trapping me between his arms. He lowered his voice, letting the silence of the empty office amplify his threat. You can try to go to management. Brad whispered, his breath smelling of stale espresso and peppermint. But who do you think they will believe? A rising star on the executive track, or a data clerk who just spent a month on medical leave because her heart could not handle the stress of the job? I will tell them you suffered a mental break. I will tell them the pressure made you delusional. I pressed my back against the fabric partition of my cubicle. The surgical site on my chest throbbed, a sharp reminder of my physical vulnerability. He was weaponizing my illness, twisting my survival into a liability. Brad tilted his head, watching the realization wash over my face. And let us not forget how you got your foot in the door here, Evelyn. I recommended you for this job. I handed you this opportunity. If you make a scene, you will not just be fired. I will make sure you are blacklisted across the entire financial sector in Chicago. Good luck paying those hospital bills when you are unemployable. He stepped back, adjusting his silk tie, his posture shifting back to the polished corporate golden boy. Then he delivered the final crushing blow. Besides, Brad said, offering a sickeningly sweet smile, think about what this would do to your mother. Think about Madison. The mention of my sister name felt like a physical strike. Brad was not just a ruthless coworker. He was my future brother-in-law. Hi and Madison were getting married in less than a month. In my family, Madison was the sun, and the rest of us were expected to orbit her. She had been a pageant winner, a cheerleader, the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the quiet, nerdy older sister who fixed their computers and stayed out of the way. When Brad proposed to Madison, my mother treated it like a royal coronation. Brad was wealthy, handsome, and carried a prestigious title. My mother paraded him around our suburban neighborhood as the ultimate prize. She spent hours boasting to her friends about her future son-in-law, the brilliant finance executive. To my mother, Brad was the son she always wanted, the validation she craved. If I exposed Brad for the thief he was, I would not just be dismantling his career. I would be destroying Madison's perfect wedding and shattering my mother's perfect illusion. Brad knew this. He had calculated the social geometry of my life with chilling precision. He knew my mother would never take my side over his. He knew she would accuse me of being jealous of Madison, of trying to ruin her sister's happiness out of spite. You really want to drag your family through a corporate scandal a month before the wedding? Brad asked, feigning concern. Madison is already stressed about the floral arrangements. If you start screaming about stolen code, your mother will disown you before HR even processes your termination. He picked up his coffee cup, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet room. Be a team player, Evelyn. Help me prep the slides for the board meeting on Friday. Once I get my promotion to vice president, I will make sure you get a nice little bonus, maybe even enough to cover one of your cardiology copays. He patted my shoulder, a condescending tap that made my skin crawl. Do not do anything stupid. He turned and walked away, his leather shoes padding softly against the carpet, leaving me alone in the dim light of my cubicle. I looked down at the presentation slides on my desk. The crisp white paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of my stolen labor. My breathing grew shallow. The panic tightened around my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs. He had boxed me into a perfect trap. If I fought him, I lost my job, my health insurance, and my family. If I surrendered, I lost my dignity, my creation, and my only chance to escape the crushing debt hanging over me. Brad expected me to fold. He expected me to cry in the bathroom, swallow my pride, and accept the role of the obedient technical assistant. He relied on the fact that I had spent my entire life keeping the peace, staying quiet, to avoid upsetting my mother, shrinking myself so Madison could shine. I placed my hands on the edge of the desk to steady myself. The cold plastic of the keyboard grounded me. I stared at the red error message still blinking on the monitor. Access denied. Brad thought he held all the cards. He thought his polished shoes and his tailored suit made him invincible. He thought manipulating a network directory was enough to erase me. But Brad was a finance guy. He looked at software and saw dollar signs. I looked at software and saw architecture. He did not know that a system built by a master architect always contains a backdoor, a hidden failsafe designed for emergencies. I did not wipe away tears because there were none. The despair that had choked me only moments ago hardened into something cold, sharp, and precise. I gathered the printed slides, aligned the edges perfectly, and set them aside. Brad wanted to play a game of corporate leverage. He wanted to use my family as collateral. He wanted to drag me into a war. I was going to give him one. I did not pack my desk. I did not retreat to the restroom to cry. Instead, I opened my personal encrypted drive and began compiling my arsenal. I printed out 40 pages of unarguable proof. I had the time-stamped Git repository logs showing my employee identification number, uploading the original architecture for Apex 6 months ago. I had the raw mathematical models. I had the email threads dating back to January, where Brad asked me fundamental elementary questions about how machine learning algorithms processed historical market data. His emails were glaring evidence of his technical incompetence. I placed the stack of papers into a thick manila folder. The edges of the paper felt sharp against my fingertips. Corporate theft was a serious violation at Sterling Financial. The employee handbook mandated immediate termination for intellectual property theft. I believed in the system. I believed that data facts and hard evidence would speak louder than a tailored suit and a smooth smile. I took the elevator down to the 38th floor home to the Human Resources Department. The air down here felt different. The chaotic energy of the trading floors and analytics bays gave way to hushed tones, plush beige carpets, and the faint scent of expensive linen room spray. I approached the front desk and requested an urgent meeting with Linda, the Director of Human Resources. The receptionist made a brief phone call. A few minutes later, I was ushered into a corner office that overlooked the Chicago River. Linda sat behind a sprawling glass desk. She wore a pristine cashmere sweater and a string of understated pearls. Her blonde hair was styled in an immaculate bob, not a single strand out of place. She offered a tight, practiced smile that engaged her lips, but left her eyes cold and assessing. She gestured toward a low leather chair opposite her desk. I sat down. The leather creaked under my weight. I placed the manila folder on the glass surface between us, keeping my hand resting on top of it. I am reporting a severe breach of conduct and intellectual property theft by Bradley Vance. I kept my voice level, stripped of any emotion. I let the facts lead. Brad locked me out of the Apex project directory this morning and altered the ownership tags to his own name. I have brought the commit history, the original source code drafts and correspondence that proves I am the sole architect of this algorithm. He intends to present my work to the board of directors as his own. I expected Linda to open the folder. I expected her to pull a pen from her silver holder and start taking notes. I expected the rigid machinery of corporate compliance to activate. Linda did not even glance at the folder. She kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her expression did not shift. She tilted her head, adopting a look of manufactured sympathy that made my stomach churn. "Evelyn, we value ambition here at Sterling," Linda said, her tone smooth and measured. "But we also pride ourselves on a culture of collaboration and synergy. Apex is a departmental initiative, not a solo vanity project." I stared at her, trying to process the corporate jargon she was using to deflect a blatant crime. "This is not about synergy." I pressed the folder forward an inch. "The logs inside this folder prove he changed the digital signatures today. He is stealing company resources by claiming authorship of work he did not produce." Linda unclasped her hands. She extended one perfectly manicured finger, placed it on the edge of my folder, and slowly slid it back across the glass toward me. "What I am hearing right now is a junior analyst struggling with team dynamics," Linda said. Her voice dropped an octave, taking on a warning edge. "Brad has shown exceptional leadership in steering this project toward the finish line. It is concerning to see you exhibit such hostility toward a colleague's success. Jealousy detracts from our core values, Evelyn. It creates a toxic work environment." I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. The words she was using were deliberate. Hostility, toxic environment, jealousy. She was not investigating my claim. She was building a defense for Brad by turning the accusations back onto me. "He does not even know how to run a basic regression test," I countered, gripping the armrests of my chair. "You can bring in any neutral data scientist to audit us right now. Ask Brad to explain the code. He will not be able to do it." Linda sighed. It was a heavy theatrical sigh of a parent dealing with an unruly child. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair and shifted her gaze to a framed photograph sitting on the credenza behind her desk. My eyes followed her gaze. The silver frame held a picture taken at a summer country club event. Linda was in the photo holding a glass of wine. Standing right next to her, wearing a polo shirt and a broad grin, was Brad. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The same shape of the jaw, the same narrow, calculating eyes. "Bradley is my nephew," Linda stated smoothly, not a hint of embarrassment in her voice. "And he has an impeccable track record at this firm. You, on the other hand, have become a disruption." The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. The walls of the glass office seemed to close in around me. The game had been rigged long before I even stepped off the elevator. Brad had not just warned me about his corporate leverage. I was protected by the very department designed to hold him accountable. Nepotism was the invisible shield wrapping around him. Linda opened the top drawer of her desk. The metal track glided silently. She withdrew a single sheet of paper and set it in front of me. It was not a grievance form. It was a formal corporate reprimand. The header read, "Performance Improvement Plan." I looked down at the document. The text accused me of insubordination, inability to accept constructive feedback, and creating friction within a high-priority project team. "This is a formal warning," Linda explained, handing me a heavy silver pen. "You are being placed on a 30-day PIP. You will relinquish all technical control of the Apex initiative to your project lead, Bradley Vance. You will support him as requested. If you bring these baseless allegations up again to me, to management, or to any other employee, it will be considered gross insubordination." She leaned forward, dropping the sympathetic facade entirely. Her eyes were hard and flat. "If you violate the terms of this PIP, you will be terminated for cause immediately." Termination for cause meant no severance package. It meant the company could deny my unemployment claims. It meant losing my corporate health insurance on the spot. A dull throb radiated from the center of my chest, right beneath my sternum. I pressed 2 fingers against my wrist, feeling the uneven, frantic flutter of my pulse. My cardiologist had warned me about stress. The valve repair surgery had saved my life, but the recovery was fragile. I was drowning in $80,000 of out-of-pocket medical debt. My rent in Chicago was due in 2 weeks. My prescription medications cost hundreds of dollars a month. Without the corporate health plan, I would not be able to afford the pills, keeping my heart beating in rhythm. Linda knew this. HR had processed my medical leave. She knew exactly how vulnerable I was. She was using my illness and my financial desperation as a leash to force me into submission. "Sign the document, Evelyn," Linda commanded softly. "Or we can have security escort you out of the building right now, and you can explain to your mother why you threw away your career out of spite." My mother. Brad had fed Linda the family dynamics too. They had mapped out every single pressure point I possessed. I looked at the folder of evidence sitting uselessly on the glass desk. The logs, the emails, the late nights. None of it mattered against the impenetrable wall of corporate nepotism. I picked up the silver pen. The metal felt ice-cold against my skin. My hand shook as I dragged the ink across the signature line, signing away my dignity, my project, and my voice. Linda took the paper back, inspecting the signature with a satisfied nod. She slid it into a pristine file folder. "I am glad we could reach an alignment," Linda said, returning to her fake professional smile. Brad is expecting you to format the slide deck before the end of the day. You may return to your desk." I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I picked up my useless folder of evidence and walked out of the corner office. I navigated the plush beige carpets of the HR department, stepped into the elevator, and stared at my own reflection in the brushed steel doors. I looked pale, defeated, hollowed out. I had lost my project. I had been gagged by the company. I was trapped in a job where my tormentor was now my boss, and he was about to marry into my family. The isolation was suffocating. I had nowhere to turn at work, and as I rode the elevator down to the lobby, dread pooled in my stomach. I knew exactly what awaited me at the family dinner that evening. The corporate execution was over. The family ambush was about to begin. The drive to my mother house in the Oakbrook suburbs felt like a funeral march. Traffic on the expressway crawled, giving me far too much time to process the corporate execution I had just survived. My phone buzzed incessantly in the cup holder. The screen illuminated with text after text from my mother, demanding my prompt arrival for a mandatory family dinner. She called it a celebration. I knew it was an orchestration. I parked on the pristine concrete driveway, cut the engine, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to take a slow, shallow breath to ease the stinging pain in my chest. I pushed the car door open, walked up the brick pathway, and turned the brass knob on the heavy oak front door. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive Cabernet hit me immediately. I walked into the dining room, and the visual waiting for me felt like a physical blow. Brad sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He had claimed the chair that used to belong to my late father, a seat my mother had kept vacant for a decade. He slouched back, looking impossibly smug in a tailored charcoal blazer, holding a crystal wine glass by the stem. Madison sat pressed against his side. Her hand rested high on his thigh, the 3-carat diamond engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier overhead. My older sister Sarah and her husband Jamal sat on the opposite side of the table. Jamal offered me a tight, sympathetic nod, sensing the tension radiating from my posture. Sarah just focused on her plate, avoiding eye contact entirely. "Evelyn, you are late," my mother announced, emerging from the kitchen with a porcelain serving dish. She wore a silk blouse and her signature pearls, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of blonde waves. "Sit down. We are already toasting." I pulled out the only empty chair located at the far end of the table, furthest from the food and directly in the line of fire. I sat down and placed my hands in my lap, digging my fingernails into my palms to stay grounded. My mother poured herself another glass of wine and raised it high. "We have incredible news to celebrate tonight." She beamed, her eyes fixed entirely on Brad. "Our brilliant future son-in-law has just spearheaded a massive technological breakthrough at Sterling Financial. He is presenting his genius software to the executive board on Friday, and the managing partners are already discussing a promotion to vice president." Brad offered a modest, self-deprecating chuckle that made my skin crawl. "It was a team effort, Susan," he lied smoothly. "But yes, the Apex algorithm is going to revolutionize our risk forecasting. The board expects it to generate millions in new revenue. I just had to take the reins and steer the ship in the right direction." He locked eyes with me from across the table. A cold, victorious challenge burned in his gaze. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to scream and throw my plate so he could point a finger and call me hysterical. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. I kept my mouth shut. Madison took a delicate sip of her sparkling water and set the glass down with a sharp clink. "See, Evelyn." Madison sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "This is what a real career looks like. Brad is about to become a vice president before he even turns 32. You work at the exact same company in the exact same department, and you are still just sitting in a cubicle doing data entry." I looked at my younger sister. She wore a designer cashmere sweater funded by my mother credit cards. She had never worked a corporate job in her life, yet she spoke with the unearned arrogance of someone who believed she had conquered the world simply by securing a wealthy fiancé. "Some of us actually do the heavy lifting behind the scenes." I replied, my voice tight and measured. Madison rolled her eyes and flipped her glossy hair over her shoulder. "Heavy lifting, please. Brad told us you are barely hanging on. He said he had to put you on some sort of probationary plan today, just to keep you from dragging the whole team down. You should be thanking him for not firing you." The air left my lungs. Brad had not just stolen my project. He had weaponized the fraudulent HR reprimand and fed it to my family as gossip, framing himself as my merciful savior. He was rewriting reality, erasing my 6 months of agonizing labor, and painting me as an incompetent charity case. My mother set her wineglass down and leveled a harsh, assessing glare in my direction. "Madison is right, Evelyn. You have always struggled with taking direction. You need to learn how to be a team player. Brad is going to be your boss now. You need to show him the respect his position commands." She sliced a piece of roast beef, chewed it slowly, and then pivoted the conversation with lethal precision. "Speaking of Brad's new position, we need to discuss the wedding budget." My stomach plummeted. The floral vendor has doubled their quote for the imported orchids. My mother continued waving her silver fork. "And Madison has her heart set on upgrading the reception menu to include the lobster carving station. The venue requires an additional deposit by next Tuesday." "That sounds expensive," Jamal muttered into his water glass, speaking for the first time all evening. "It is an investment in Madison's special day," my mother countered sharply. "And since Brad is bringing such immense prestige to this family, we have to ensure the event reflects his new status." She turned her piercing gaze back to me. "Evelyn, I need you to transfer $20,000 to my account by Monday morning." The dining room fell dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stared at her, certain I had misheard the demand. "You want me to give you $20,000 for flowers and lobster. You have savings." My mother stated, phrasing it not as a question, but as an inventory of my assets. "You have been hoarding your paycheck for years, living in that tiny apartment. It is time you stepped up and contributed to this family." I gripped the edge of the table. The surgical scar on my chest began to throb with a vicious, stinging heat. "Mom, I just had open-heart surgery 4 weeks ago." I reminded her, my voice shaking with restrained fury. "My insurance claim was denied for the specialist. I have $80,000 in medical debt. That savings account is the only thing keeping me out of bankruptcy. I need that money to survive." My mother waved her hand, dismissing my near-death experience as a minor inconvenience. "Do not be dramatic, Evelyn. The hospital will let you set up a payment plan. You can send them $50 a month. Madison wedding is happening next month. This is a time-sensitive family emergency. It is not an emergency." I fired back, my volume rising. "It is a party. You want me to drain my survival fund so you can show off to your country club friends." Brad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He steepled his fingers, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. "Evelyn, if money is that tight, I can talk to HR about getting you a small advance on your salary. Assuming, of course, that you pass your performance improvement plan. Consider it a favor from your new boss. He was offering me a loan funded by the very company he was using to extort me." The sheer audacity of his manipulation made the room spin. He sat there in my father chair, drinking my mother wine, stealing my life work, and offering to lend me pennies while demanding $20,000 for a party. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I am not giving you a dime," I said, staring directly at my mother. "And Brad is not a genius. He is a fraud. He stole the Apex algorithm from my server directory this morning. He does not even know how to write a basic line of code." The table erupted. Madison shrieked, slamming her hands down. "How dare you? You are just a jealous, bitter loser." Before I could say another word, my mother executed her favorite, most devastating tactic. She gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. Her face contorted into a mask of sudden, agonizing pain. She slumped back against her chair, breathing in short, shallow gasps. "Susan!" Brad shouted, jumping up and playing the concerned son. "My chest!" My mother wheezed, clutching her pearl necklace. The palpitations. "Evelyn, you are giving me a heart attack. You are killing me with your jealousy." Madison rushed to her side, rubbing her shoulders and glaring at me with pure hatred. "Look what you are doing to her. You are so selfish. Just leave. Get out of here before you put her in the hospital." I stood frozen, staring at the pathetic manufactured theater playing out in front of me. I knew it was fake. I knew her heart was perfectly healthy. I was the one with the scarred sternum. I was the one taking beta blockers to keep my heart from failing. Yet she was using the symptoms of my actual trauma to silence me performing a medical crisis to protect the thief sitting at the head of the table. Brad locked eyes with me over my mother's shoulder. He did not look worried. He looked victorious. His plan had worked flawlessly. The cage had snapped shut. If I kept speaking, I was the villain trying to kill my mother. If I stayed, I was the defeated servant. I picked up my purse, turned my back on the sickening display of family loyalty, and walked out of the dining room. The heavy front door slammed shut behind me, sealing me out in the cold Chicago night. My hands shook so badly I could barely unlock my car door. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, trapped in a nightmare with no visible exit. I was entirely alone, stripped of my project, my reputation, and my family. A sharp tap on my car window made me jump. I turned my head. Standing in the driveway, illuminated by the harsh glow of the street lamp, was Jamal. He gestured for me to roll down the window. His face was devoid of the polite, quiet mask he usually wore at family dinners. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and wide awake. He had followed me out, and he was holding a set of car keys. Jamal opened the passenger door of my sedan and slid onto the leather seat. He pulled the door shut quietly, plunging us back into the dim glow of the street lamp. He did not offer a comforting hug or hand me a tissue. He just stared through the windshield at the sprawling brick house, watching the shadows move behind the drawn curtains, where my mother was likely still clutching her chest in her fabricated agony. Jamal was a senior cybersecurity auditor for a prominent tech firm downtown. He spent his days hunting for anomalies in code and tracking down corporate fraud. He operated in fax server logs and immutable data. He had always been the quiet observer at these family dinners, sipping his water, while my mother and Madison spun their toxic narratives. Today, the observer had seen enough. He turned his head to face me. He spoke in a low, even tone. "I watched your face when Brad started talking about that algorithm. You did not look jealous, Evelyn. You looked like a person watching someone else drive off in their stolen car." He took a slow breath. "Brad took your source code, did he not? Hearing someone else validate my reality broke the dam." I gripped the steering wheel and the tears finally spilled over. I told him everything. I detailed the morning ambush, the network access denial, the printed slides with Brad listed as the lead architect. I explained my desperate trip to the Human Resources Department, only to discover that the director, Linda, was his aunt. I outlined the performance improvement plan they forced me to sign under the threat of losing my health insurance. They locked me out. I whispered, my voice thick with exhaustion. They wiped my name off the directory and gagged me with a corporate reprimand. I have no proof left. Jamal let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He leaned back against the headrest and shook his head. "Evelyn," he said, his voice taking on the crisp edge of a seasoned investigator. "Brad is a finance guy. Linda is a human resources bureaucrat. They operate in a world of printed memos, signed forms, and office politics. They think changing the name on a file folder deletes the past. They are amateurs playing a digital game they do not comprehend." I turned to him, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "What do you mean?" Jamal shifted in his seat, bringing his full attention to me. "I audit corporate networks for a living. I hunt people who try to cover their tracks. You cannot just erase a digital footprint in a modern enterprise system. Every time you compiled that code, every time you ran a test simulation, every time you logged into that server, over the past 6 months, the system generated a unique timestamp linked directly to your employee identification number. Brad might have changed the surface-level permissions today, but the master server logs live in the cloud. He does not have the technical clearance to scrub the historical metadata. Your fingerprints are baked into the core architecture of that algorithm." A faint spark of hope ignited in my chest, but the reality of my situation quickly smothered it. "It does not matter," I replied, staring down at the dashboard. "Even if the logs exist, Human Resources will never authorize an audit. Linda controls the internal investigation process. She will bury the request and fire me for insubordination before I can ever get an information technology technician to pull the records." Jamal reached over and tapped his index finger against the dashboard to emphasize his next point. "That is because you are playing by their rules. You went to Human Resources. Human Resources exists to protect the company from liability. In their eyes, backing a young executive and sweeping a dispute under the rug is the easiest way to protect the firm. You have to stop fighting the internal battle, Evelyn. You need to drop a bomb on them from the outside." He leaned closer, his eyes sharp and focused. "Do you know why Brad is pushing so hard to present Apex to the executive board this Friday?" I shook my head. He said it was for a promotion to vice president. Jamal scoffed. A promotion is just the cherry on top. Sterling Financial is in the final stages of being acquired by Vanguard Holdings, a prominent hedge fund out of New York. The deal has been an open secret in the financial district for weeks. Vanguard is currently conducting their due diligence. They are tearing through Sterling books, their client lists, and their proprietary technology to ensure the company is worth the purchase price. He paused, letting the weight of the corporate reality sink in. Apex is Sterling's shiny new toy. It is the flagship asset they are using to justify their valuation to the buyers. I still did not understand how this helped me. If Apex is that important, management will protect Brad even more. They need him to sell it. Jamal shook his head again, a grim smile forming on his lips. You are looking at it wrong. Due diligence is the most fragile period in any corporate merger. The buyers are looking for any reason to lower the purchase price or walk away. If Vanguard discovers that the flagship technology they are about to buy is stolen property, it becomes a severe legal liability. Intellectual property theft during an acquisition is corporate suicide. If the original author sues for copyright infringement after the merger, Vanguard inherits the lawsuit. They will drop the deal instantly, or they will force Sterling to purge the liabilities. Jamal looked straight into my eyes. You do not need to convince your corrupt human resources department. You need to deliver the server logs and the proof of theft directly to the Vanguard due diligence team. You bypass Linda. You bypass Brad. You put the evidence right in the hands of the people holding the checkbook. The brilliance of the strategy washed over me. Brad had cornered me in a local skirmish, but Jamal was handing me the launch codes for a tactical strike. If the buyers found out the code was stolen, they would demand an immediate independent audit. Sterling Financial would have no choice but to comply. The internal shield Linda had built would shatter under the weight of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition on the line. But how do I get the logs? I asked, my mind racing. I am locked out of the main directory. If I try to access the back-end network, the system will flag my employee identification number, and Linda will fire me on the spot for violating the improvement plan. Jamal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive. He held it up in the dim light of the car. You do not use the company network. You use my secure virtual private network. I have encrypted auditing software that can extract back-end metadata without triggering standard internal alarms. You just need to run this executable file from your terminal. It will pull the historical server logs, bypass the local firewall, and dump the evidence directly onto an external cloud server that I control. He placed the drive into the palm of my hand. The smooth plastic felt heavy, loaded with the potential to reclaim my life. Once we have the data, Jamal continued, his tone methodical and relentless, I will help you trace the Vanguard compliance officers. We package the raw data logs, your initial source code commits, and the timestamps of Brad changing the administrative rights. We send it as an anonymous whistleblower tip to the buyers, and we copy the Sterling chief executive officer directly. By the time Brad steps up to that podium on Friday, he will be walking into a firing squad. I looked down at the drive in my hand, then back at Jamal. He was risking his own professional integrity to help me. He was stepping into the line of fire of my toxic family. Why are you doing this, Jamal? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jamal looked toward the house. Through the living room window, we could see Brad standing by the fireplace, laughing, a glass of wine in his hand, looking like a king presiding over his court. Because I am tired of watching them break you down, Jamal said, his voice hard. I sit at that table every holiday and watch your mother and Madison treat you like dirt while they worship a fraud. You built something brilliant, Evelyn. It is time you stopped letting them convince you that you are worthless. He opened the car door and stepped out into the cold night air. Do exactly what I said. Extract the data tomorrow morning. We meet at my place tomorrow night to compile the package. Let them think they won tonight. It will make their fall that much harder. He closed the door, leaving me alone in the car. The suffocating despair that had gripped me in the dining room was gone. It had burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I started the engine. The headlights illuminated the dark street ahead. Brad thought he had buried me, but he had merely handed me the shovel. I arrived at the Sterling Financial Building before the sun broke over Lake Michigan. The lobby was desolate, echoing only with the sound of the revolving glass doors and the distant hum of the security desk. I rode the elevator to the 38th floor, my fingers curled tightly around the black flash drive in my coat pocket. Jamal had given me the tool to dismantle the lies. I just needed 5 uninterrupted minutes to execute the payload. I logged into my terminal. The screen glowed in the dim light of the empty cubicle row. I inserted the drive into the side port. The extraction software required a manual override to bypass the local security protocols. I typed the commands Jamal had written down for me. A progress bar appeared in the center of the screen calculating the server log metadata. The green line crept across the dark monitor. 50%, 60%. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a rapid staccato rhythm that made the surgical scar on my chest throb. 70%. Then a sharp chime echoed from my desktop communication application. An urgent calendar invite flashed across the screen, overriding all other windows. Mandatory department briefing. Executive boardroom. Immediate attendance required. I glanced at the progress bar. 85%. I could not cancel the extraction now without corrupting the files and alerting the information technology department. I minimized the window, leaving the script running in the hidden background, and grabbed my notebook. I assumed the meeting was a routine status update ahead of the Vanguard merger. I was prepared to sit in the back, keep my head down, and let the morning pass. I was wrong. I walked down the corridor toward the executive boardroom. The heavy glass doors stood open. Inside, the atmosphere felt dense, suffocating. 6 managing directors sat around the polished oak table, their faces grim and unreadable. Linda, from Human Resources, sat near the corner, her hands folded neatly over a pristine legal pad. Standing at the front of the room, operating the projection screen, was Brad. He wore a somber expression, his shoulders slumped in a manufactured display of defeat. The contrast from his arrogant, victorious posture the night before was staggering. He had transformed himself into a tragic hero, carrying the weight of the world. I took the only empty seat near the back. The moment I sat down, the doors clicked shut, sealing the room. Brad cleared his throat, looking down at his hands before lifting his gaze to meet the eyes of the senior partners. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice laced with heavy, calculated regret. "I called this emergency briefing because we have a critical situation regarding the Harrison Trust portfolio. The Harrison Trust was our most lucrative client. Their data sets were the foundation of our quarterly revenue, encompassing millions in predictive asset models." Brad pressed a button on his remote. The large screen on the wall illuminated, displaying a server directory status. The root folder for the Harrison accounts read 0 bytes. "The data has been purged," Brad stated flatly. "The primary database, the backup redundancies, and the client forecasting models have all been permanently deleted." A collective intake of breath swept the room. One of the directors leaned forward, his face pale and strained. "How is that possible? Who authorized a wipe of a Tier 1 client database?" Brad did not answer immediately. He let the tension stretch, letting the panic take hold of the executives. He played the silence like an instrument. Then he pressed the button again. A new slide appeared. It showed a system access log with a distinct timestamp reading 2:30 in the morning. Next to the timestamp was an employee identification number. My employee identification number. Brad turned toward me, his face a perfect mask of sorrow and disappointment. He looked like a man forced to deliver devastating news about a beloved friend. "The system logs indicate that Evelyn initiated a hard wipe of the Harrison directories during the night." He spoke softly, ensuring the entire room had to strain to hear his heartbreak. "I was alerted by the automated failsafe an hour ago, but the damage was irreversible. The data is gone. The financial loss will span into the millions." The blood drained from my face. My heart stuttered, a cold panic seizing my chest. I stood up my chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "That is a lie," I said, my voice vibrating with sheer disbelief. "I was asleep at 2:30 in the morning. I do not even have the administrative clearance to bypass the backup redundancies on the Harrison accounts." Brad looked at the board members, offering a small, helpless shrug. "She had the clearance until yesterday," he replied, his tone dripping with fake empathy. "We had to remove her administrative privileges because her performance had severely deteriorated. She has been struggling." Linda seamlessly picked up her cue. She opened her folder and slid a document across the table toward the senior partner. Evelyn was placed on a formal performance improvement plan yesterday afternoon. Linda explained, her voice crisp and clinical. She exhibited alarming hostility regarding project reassignments. She refused to accept constructive feedback. Given her recent medical leave and the physical toll of her heart surgery, we assumed the stress was simply too much for her to handle. We tried to offer her support. Brad stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart, looking directly at the managing directors. "I take full responsibility," he said. "I tried to mentor Evelyn. I brought her onto my team, hoping I could guide her through her recovery. I ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe in her potential. I should have realized her psychological state was too fragile for a high-stakes environment. I never imagined she would sabotage the firm in a fit of delusion. The orchestration was flawless. They were not just firing me, they were annihilating my professional existence. Brad had used the administrative access he stole from me yesterday to spoof my credentials. He had logged into the mainframe under my name, deleted a multi-million-dollar database, and framed it as the erratic revenge of a mentally unstable employee. I was building an ironclad narrative. Any claim I made about the stolen Apex algorithm would now sound like the paranoid ramblings of a disgruntled, vindictive saboteur. I looked around the table. The directors stared at me with varying degrees of disgust and pity. They saw a liability. They saw a deranged woman who had jeopardized their bonuses and their impending merger. "I am telling you the truth," I pleaded, looking at the senior partner. "Brad orchestrated this. He is setting me up." The partner held up his hand, silencing me instantly. His expression was made of stone. "Save it for the litigation team," he said coldly. "You have cost this firm millions. We will be conducting a full forensic investigation, but your presence here is a security risk." Linda stood up and gestured toward the heavy glass doors. "Evelyn, you are excused. Security will escort you to a holding room until we decide how to proceed with the authorities." I stood frozen in the center of the boardroom. The weight of the injustice threatened to crush my lungs. I had spent years building a flawless reputation, working through nights and weekends, bleeding for this company. In 10 minutes, a mediocre man with a polished smile had reduced my entire career to ashes. I could feel the eyes of the board members burning into my skin, judging me, condemning me without a trial. I turned toward the door. As I walked past the projection screen, I caught Brad's eye. The sorrowful mask had vanished. For a fraction of a second, shielded from the view of the board members, his lips curled into a sharp, triumphant smirk. His eyes burned with a sadistic thrill. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to know that he could destroy me without breaking a sweat, and that the world would applaud him for doing it. I walked out of the boardroom, my hands trembling at my sides. The air in the corridor felt thick and unbreathable. Every step echoed loudly in the quiet hall. 2 security guards waited by the elevator bank, their faces stern and unyielding. Brad had drawn his weapon and fired a lethal shot. He had stripped away my credibility, ensuring that no one in the financial sector would ever hire me again. He believed he had won the war. The security guards escorted me not to the lobby, but to a small, windowless holding room adjacent to the Human Resources Department. The room contained a single circular table and 2 plastic chairs. The air conditioning hummed loudly, blowing cold air that made me shiver in my thin blazer. I sat at the table for 45 minutes, staring at the blank white wall, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. The corporate machinery was moving upstairs, deciding whether to call the police or simply bankrupt me in civil court. I had no phone. I had no access to my email. I was cut off from the world, trapped in a sterile corporate cell. The heavy door clicked open. Brad stepped inside, shutting the door behind him and locking the deadbolt with a sharp, definitive snap. He was alone. The sorrowful, burdened executive act he had performed in the boardroom was gone. He looked relaxed, almost bored, like a hunter surveying a trapped animal he no longer considered a threat. He walked over to the table and tossed a pristine manila folder onto the surface. It slid across the laminate and bumped against my folded hands. "Open it," Brad instructed, leaning his hip against the edge of the table and crossing his arms. I flipped the heavy paper cover back. Inside lay 2 documents. The first was a pre-written letter of resignation, citing overwhelming personal distress and health complications as the reason for my immediate departure. The second was a non-disclosure agreement. The clauses were dense and aggressive, forbidding me from discussing Sterling Financial, the Apex project, or any internal operations under the penalty of severe financial damages. Attached to the back was a severance offer, $5,000, a pittance, a final insult designed to mock my desperation. "Sign the papers," Evelyn. Brad said, his voice dropping into a low conversational whisper that felt more terrifying than a shout. "You sign the resignation, and you agree to the non-disclosure terms. In exchange, the firm will consider the Harrison data wipe a tragic technical error caused by your mental instability. We will not press criminal charges. We will not sue you for damages. You take the $5,000, you walk out of this building, and you never speak of Apex again." I stared at the documents. The ink felt like a physical threat. "You orchestrated the data wipe to force me into signing this," I stated, keeping my voice as flat and steady as possible. "You spoofed my credentials to destroy a multi-million-dollar client account just to steal my code and silence me." Brad offered a slow, deliberate smile. He reached out and tapped the non-disclosure agreement with his index finger. "You are missing the bigger picture. I did not orchestrate anything." A troubled, sickly employee buckled under the pressure of her demanding job and lashed out. "That is the truth the board believes. That is the truth Human Resources documented. If you refuse to sign these papers, the firm will hand the server logs over to the authorities. They will press felony charges for corporate sabotage. You will spend years fighting a legal battle you cannot afford, and you will lose." He leaned closer, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the stale air of the holding room. "And let us consider the family dynamic. If you force this into a public lawsuit, the scandal will ruin Madison wedding. The stress will humiliate your mother in front of her country club friends. Madison will make sure your mother cuts you out of the family entirely. You will not just be broke and unemployable. You will be completely alone." He had mapped out every exit and bricked it shut. Job, finances, family. He had isolated every pillar of my life and placed a detonator at the base. "You take the deal." Brad whispered, his eyes gleaming with malignant satisfaction. "You accept that you lost. You are a failure, Evelyn. You do not have the stamina for this world. Accept your place and walk away before I destroy whatever small fraction of a life you have left." The room felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sheer cruelty of his proposition. He wanted to strip me of my creation, humiliate me publicly, and force me to sign a confession of incompetence just to escape prison. The suffocation reached its peak. The pressure was a physical force pressing against my chest, threatening to trigger another cardiac episode. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture so profoundly condescending it sent a jolt of electricity through my nervous system. "Be smart, Evelyn. Take the $5,000. In that precise moment, beneath the crushing weight of his extortion, something deep within my mind shifted. The panic subsided, replaced by the cold, calculating logic of a systems architect. Brad thought he was dealing with a frightened subordinate. He forgot he was dealing with the person who designed the very infrastructure he was trying to steal. A software engineer views a threat not as a wall, but as an error in the code, a problem requiring a specific tactical override. I looked down at the resignation letter. My mind raced through the sequence of events. The server logs Jamal had asked me to extract. The green progress bar that had hit 85% before I minimized the window. The black flash drive still sitting in the USB port of my terminal upstairs, running the extraction script in the hidden background. Brad had made a critical miscalculation. He had locked me in this room to force a signature, leaving my terminal logged in and unattended. I looked up at him. I let my shoulders slump. I allowed my breathing to become shallow and ragged, mimicking the signs of a broken, defeated woman. I let a single tear slip down my cheek. "I need time," I whispered, my voice trembling with manufactured despair. "I cannot just sign this without reading the clauses. If I sign this right now, I am admitting to a crime I did not commit. Please, Brad, just give me 24 hours to review the non-disclosure agreement. I will not talk to anyone. I will go straight home. Just let me read it before I sign my life away." Brad straightened up, assessing my pathetic display. The triumphant smirk returned to his face. He thrived on my submission. He enjoyed watching me beg. 24 hours, Brad said, checking his heavy silver watch. "You leave the building now. You take the documents home. If I do not have a signed copy on my desk by 9 in the morning tomorrow, I call the police and hand over the Harrison logs." He picked up the non-disclosure agreement, folded it neatly, and handed it to me. He unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. The 2 security guards were still waiting in the corridor. "Escort her to her desk to collect her personal belongings," Brad ordered the guards. "Then walk her out of the building. She is suspended pending final termination." I clutched the folded papers to my chest, keeping my head bowed. The guards fell in step beside me. I walked the long corridor back to the main department, my heart hammering a steady, focused rhythm. I had bought myself the time I needed. I had 24 hours, but the only thing that mattered were the next 2 minutes. We reached my cubicle. The guards stood at the entrance, watching me intently. I grabbed a small cardboard box from beneath my desk and began placing my personal items inside. A framed photo, my favorite coffee mug, a handful of pens. My computer monitor was dark, the screensaver active. I reached for a notebook resting near the keyboard. As my hand brushed the edge of the monitor, my thumb grazed the mouse pad. The screen flared to life. The extraction script window was still open in the center of the display. The progress bar read 100%. Extraction complete. Data encrypted and ready for transfer. I shifted my body, blocking the screen from the guard's view. I casually tossed a few more pens into the box. With my left hand hidden behind the monitor, I gripped the small black flash drive plugged into the USB port. I pulled it free, concealing it perfectly within the palm of my hand. I dropped it into the front pocket of my blazer in one fluid motion, then closed the laptop lid with a soft click. I picked up the cardboard box. "I am ready to go." I told the guards, my voice completely steady. They escorted me to the elevator, down to the lobby, and out through the revolving glass doors. The cold Chicago wind hit my face, sharp and biting. I stood on the sidewalk, the box of my belongings in my arms, the folded resignation letter in my hand. Brad thought he had sent me home to surrender. He did not know that sitting in my pocket was the digital payload that would level his entire career. The survival mode had fully activated. I did not just have the logs proving my authorship. I had the raw data proving Brad had executed the Harrison wipe. The fuse was lit. I dropped the cardboard box onto the narrow kitchen counter of my apartment. The facade I had maintained in the holding room evaporated the instant the deadbolt clicked shut behind me. There were no tears left to shed. The manufactured panic I had weaponized against Brad vanished, replaced by a singular, icy resolve. I walked over to the small dining table that doubled as my home office. A stack of unopened medical bills sat near the edge, a quiet reminder of the leverage Brad thought he held over me. I pushed them aside. They no longer mattered. Only the black flash drive in my pocket held any weight. I booted up my personal workstation. The dual monitors flared to life, casting a stark blue glow across the dim room. I retrieved the drive and slid it into the port. A prompt appeared on the screen, asking for the decryption key Jamal had provided. I typed the sequence. The encrypted vault unlocked, spilling thousands of lines of raw server logs across the display. Brad was a man who understood spreadsheets and profit margins. He believed that altering user permissions on a superficial dashboard equated to mastering the system. He did not comprehend the immutable nature of digital architecture. Every action taken on an enterprise network leaves a trail of breadcrumbs, a microscopic echo recorded in the deepest layers of the server. I did not just have my own project history. Jamal Extraction Software had pulled the global administrator logs for the entire analytics division. I opened the raw data files and initiated a search query for my own employee identification number. The screen blurred with scrolling text before snapping to a halt. I isolated the exact time frame of the Harrison Trust data wipe. The system recorded the event at 2:30 in the morning. The login credentials belonged to me. The access token belonged to me. On the surface, the narrative Brad presented to the board of directors appeared flawless. But a system architect looks deeper than the surface. I bypassed the user credentials and ran a trace on the hardware identifiers. I cross-referenced the network access logs with the media access control addresses of the physical machines. The truth materialized in clean, irrefutable code. The command to purge the Harrison database did not originate from my cubicle terminal. The hardware footprint pointed directly to a machine located in the executive suite on the 39th floor. I pulled the specific terminal assignment. It belonged to Bradley Vance. He had logged into his own computer, spoofed my security token, and executed the wipe. I continued parsing the data, pulling the exact millisecond he revoked my administrative rights to the Apex directory. The timestamps aligned perfectly, creating a pristine chronological map of his sabotage. The evidence was cold and absolute. It was enough to send him to federal prison for corporate fraud. I saved the extracted logs into a secure encrypted folder on my local drive. Gathering the evidence was only the first phase of the counterstrike. Brad had stolen my creation and intended to present it to the Vanguard hedge fund investors as his own intellectual property. I needed to ensure that his moment of triumph would transform into a public execution. I needed to weaponize the algorithm itself. I poured a glass of cold water, took a slow sip, and sat back down in front of the monitors. Brad believed he had locked me out of the Apex infrastructure. He had revoked my access to the front-end portals and severed my connection to the Sterling Financial virtual private network. He thought he had changed the locks on the house. He did not realize I had poured the concrete for the foundation. A true developer never builds a fortress without hiding a key under the mat. During the initial coding phase of Apex Y, had embedded a ghost protocol into the background architecture. It was a diagnostic backdoor designed to allow me to bypass the main firewall and run maintenance tests without disrupting the live servers. The access point was buried so deep within the network registry that it was invisible to routine security sweeps. Brad, with his superficial understanding of technology, would never know it existed. I opened a secure command terminal on my machine. I bypassed the corporate gateway and routed my connection through a series of proxy servers to mask my location. I executed the ghost protocol. The command prompt blinked for a fraction of a second before granting me full root access to the Apex mainframe. I was inside. I navigated through the labyrinth of code I had written over the past 6 months. Seeing the architecture again brought a fierce wave of protectiveness. Brad had slapped his name on the title page, but the soul of the machine was mine. It was time to sign my work. I began drafting a custom payload, a digital watermark, designed to sleep within the core regression logic of the algorithm. This was not a simple text file or a hidden comment in the margin. It was a cryptographic signature woven directly into the neural network of the software. If anyone tried to delete the watermark, the entire algorithm would collapse and render the software useless. The only way to keep Apex functional was to keep my signature intact. I coded the trigger sequence with meticulous precision. The watermark would remain dormant during standard operations. Brad could run his basic demonstrations, flip through his superficial slides, and boast to the investors without triggering a single alarm. The payload required a highly specific stimulus to activate. I designed an anomalous data query, a complex string of market variables and historical risk metrics that no amateur would ever think to input. When that specific query was executed, the algorithm would prioritize my payload over all other functions. The watermark would override the presentation layer. It would seize control of the graphic interface, lock out all peripheral inputs, and project a hard-coded message across every connected display. It was a digital landmine armed and waiting for the right footstep. I reviewed the syntax, ensuring the encryption was flawless. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard in a rhythmic, unbroken cadence. The anxiety that had plagued me in the human resources office was entirely gone. I was operating in my element, manipulating the very fabric of the system that Brad was trying to steal. I initiated the injection protocol. The command terminal fed my custom payload directly into the Apex repository. The code integrated seamlessly, wrapping itself around the core logic without leaving a ripple on the surface. The system accepted the modification. The digital watermark was locked into place. I severed the connection and closed the back door, wiping my entry footprints from the temporary cache. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the dark monitors. Outside my apartment window, the city of Chicago was quiet. The clock on my desk read 2:15 in the morning. Brad was likely asleep in his luxury condominium, dreaming of the promotion and the prestige waiting for him at the end of the week. He believed he had outsmarted a low-level analyst. He believed his tailored suits and his familial connections made him untouchable. He had no idea that a silent, encrypted warhead was currently resting in the heart of his stolen presentation. I had the server logs proving his sabotage. I had the digital watermark securing my intellectual property. The pieces were assembled on the board. The next step was delivering the weapon to the only person capable of pulling the trigger. I reached for my phone and drafted a short encrypted message to Jamal. "I have the package. I am ready." I set the phone down and watched the screen dim. The survival instinct had evolved into a calculated offensive strategy. Brad had demanded my resignation by 9 in the morning. He was going to get exactly what he asked for, wrapped in a silence that would guarantee his ultimate destruction. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for him to step onto the stage. I arrived at Jamal and Sarah's house shortly after 3 in the morning. The streets of the Chicago suburbs were empty, illuminated only by the rhythmic flash of yellow traffic lights. I parked my sedan behind Jamal's heavily modified SUV and walked up the paved driveway. The front door unlocked before I even reached the porch. Sarah stood in the doorway wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a mug of herbal tea. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp. She did not offer empty platitudes or ask how I was feeling. She just stepped aside and motioned toward the basement stairs. Jamal was waiting in his home office, a climate-controlled room lined with server racks and cooling fans. 3 large monitors dominated the desk, displaying cascading streams of encrypted network traffic. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, his fingers drumming a rapid beat against the edge of the desk. I placed the black flash drive on the glass surface next to his keyboard. "The package is complete," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. I pulled the global administrator logs. I mapped the hardware identifiers. The data proves Brad spoofed my credentials and initiated the Harrison database wipe from his own terminal. I also injected a dormant cryptographic signature into the Apex core architecture. If he tries to present the model, the signature will activate upon a specific query. Jamal picked up the drive, turning the small piece of plastic over in his hand. He looked at me, a grim smile forming on his lips. "You did not just build a defense, Evelyn. You built a guillotine." He plugged the drive into a dedicated offline terminal and began running the data through a secondary sanitization protocol to ensure no tracing software had attached itself to the files. Sarah walked down the stairs and set a fresh cup of coffee on the desk next to me. She pulled up a stool and sat beside her husband. We spent the last 2 hours mapping the Vanguard Holdings corporate structure. Sarah explained, her tone methodical. We identified the lead compliance officer spearheading the due diligence process for the Sterling acquisition. His name is Arthur Vance. No relation to Brad, thankfully. He is a former federal prosecutor who specializes in corporate fraud. He operates strictly by the book. If he catches a whiff of intellectual property theft, he will halt the merger negotiations instantly. Jamal nodded, his eyes fixed on the scrolling data lines. "We are not just sending this to Vanguard. We need to ensure maximum collateral damage within Sterling Financial. If we only notify the buyers, Sterling management might try to quietly bury the acquisition and let Brad walk away with a severance package. We have to trap Sterling Executive Board in the blast radius." He pulled up a secure email client routed through a virtual private network that masked his location and bounced the IP address across 3 different continents. "We are sending the complete data package directly to Arthur Vance at Vanguard." Jamal continued, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "And we are blind copying Mr. Sterling, the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Financial, on his private encrypted server." The brilliance of the strategy was absolute. In the ruthless arena of American corporate finance, sentiment and family loyalty held zero currency. We were not appealing to morality. We were targeting their wallets. Intellectual property theft on the eve of a billion-dollar merger was a catastrophic liability. If Vanguard discovered that Sterling flagship algorithm was stolen property, they would assume the entire company infrastructure was compromised. The valuation would plummet. The deal would collapse. If Mr. Sterling received the evidence at the exact same moment as the buyers, he would be backed into an inescapable corner. He could not cover up the theft because Vanguard already had the proof. His only option to salvage the merger would be to aggressively amputate the infection. He would have to publicly execute Brad to prove to the buyers that Sterling Financial possessed the integrity to police its own ranks. I sat down next to Jamal and watched the screen. Attach the hardware logs proving Brad executed the Harrison wipe, I instructed, my voice flat. Let them see that their rising star is not just a thief, but a corporate saboteur who cost them millions to cover his tracks. Jamal attached the encrypted zip file containing the raw server data, the time-stamped commit histories, and the hardware MAC address logs. He began drafting the body of the email. He did not write a lengthy manifesto or a desperate plea for justice. He wrote like a machine, using the cold, precise language of a forensic audit. Subject: urgent security breach and intellectual property theft notification regarding Apex architecture. To Arthur Vance, Vanguard Holdings due diligence command. A critical compliance violation has occurred within the Sterling Financial Analytics Division. The enclosed encrypted data package contains immutable server logs confirming that the predictive risk model known as Apex is stolen intellectual property. The current project lead, Bradley Vance, illegally revoked the original author administrative access and altered the ownership metadata. Furthermore, the hardware logs confirm that Bradley Vance spoofed employee credentials to permanently delete the Harrison Trust databases in an effort to conceal the theft and terminate the original architect. Proceeding with the acquisition of Sterling Financial, while they harbor stolen intellectual property and active corporate saboteurs, exposes Vanguard Holdings to severe federal litigation and copyright infringement liabilities. You are advised to demand an immediate independent forensic audit of the Sterling mainframe before finalizing any financial commitments. Jamal reviewed the text, checking the attachments one final time. He looked at me, his hand hovering over the mouse. Once I hit send, this goes nuclear, Evelyn. There is no pulling it back. Brad will be facing federal charges. The Human Resources Director will be implicated for facilitating the cover-up. Your mother and Madison are going to lose their minds when the wedding falls apart. I stared at the screen, reading the cold, hard facts that would dismantle the lie my family had worshipped. They made their choice when they demanded I empty my savings to fund a party for a thief. I replied, my voice devoid of hesitation. Send it. Jamal clicked the mouse. A small loading icon spun for a fraction of a second, and then the screen cleared. Message sent. The digital bomb had been dropped into the inboxes of the two most powerful men involved in the merger. It was currently sitting in cyberspace, a ticking time bomb waiting for the morning light. Sarah exhaled a long breath and rested her head on Jamal's shoulder. She looked at me, a fierce protectiveness in her eyes. You need to sleep, Evelyn. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. I shook my head. I have one more thing to do before the sun comes up. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded resignation letter and the non-disclosure agreement Brad had handed me in the holding room. I smoothed the creases against the glass desk. I pulled a pen from my pocket and signed both documents with a steady hand. Jamal frowned, leaning forward. Why are you signing those? The entire point of the email is to prove he extorted you. I slid the signed papers into a fresh envelope. Because Brad told me if I did not have these on his desk by 9 in the morning, he would hand the fabricated evidence to the police. If I do not deliver them, he will panic and realize something is wrong. He might try to flee or delete more data. I need him to feel completely victorious. I need him to walk into that boardroom on Friday believing he holds my leash. Arrogance makes people careless. I sealed the envelope. I am going to walk into the office tomorrow, drop my resignation on his desk, and let him think he won. He will be so drunk on his own power that he will never see the executioner standing right behind him. I left Jamal House as the sky began to turn a bruised, pale gray. The exhaustion in my bones was heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. The trap was set. The evidence was in the hands of the corporate elite. I had weaponized the very system Brad sought to control. I drove back to my apartment, showered, and changed into a sharp, understated black suit. I looked in the mirror, examining the dark circles under my eyes and the pale cast of my skin. I did not bother with makeup to conceal my fatigue. The aesthetic of a broken, defeated woman was the final camouflage I needed. I grabbed the sealed envelope and walked out the door, ready to deliver the final act of my submission before the curtain dropped. Friday morning arrived with the sharp, unforgiving chill typical of Chicago in late autumn. The Sterling Financial Building buzzed with a manic, high-stakes energy. Today was the day. The Vanguard Holdings executive team had flown in from New York to witness the presentation of the Apex algorithm. This was the final hurdle before the acquisition was finalized. The lobby was filled with tailored suits, frantic assistants, and the distinct aroma of corporate anxiety. I walked through the revolving glass doors at exactly 8 in the morning. I wore a simple, unadorned black suit. My hair was pulled back tightly, and I kept my gaze fixed on the marble floor. I carried the sealed envelope containing my forced resignation and the non-disclosure agreement. I swiped my badge at the security turnstile. The light blinked green. Brad had not revoked my building access yet. He wanted me to deliver the surrender in person. I took the elevator up to the 39th floor, the executive suite. The corridor leading to the main boardroom was a hive of activity. Caterers were setting up silver urns of coffee and platters of pastries. Junior analysts were running frantically with stacks of bound portfolios. And standing near the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, presiding over the chaos like a monarch, was Brad. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than my car. His hair was slicked back flawlessly. He exuded an aura of total, unshakable invincibility. He caught sight of me walking down the corridor, and a broad, predatory smile spread across his face. He stepped away from a group of junior executives and intercepted me in the hallway, grabbing my upper arm with a grip that was entirely too firm. He pulled me slightly out of the flow of traffic, leaning in close. His expensive cologne, heavy on the bergamot and cedar, practically choked me. "You cut it close, Evelyn," Brad murmured, his voice dripping with condescension. I was beginning to think I would have to make that phone call to the authorities after all. I kept my eyes downcast, playing the role of the broken subordinate to perfection. I reached into my bag and handed him the sealed envelope. "My resignation," I whispered, forcing a slight tremor into my voice, "and the non-disclosure agreement. They are both signed. You have what you want. Please just leave me alone now." Brad took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. He tapped the thick paper against his chin, savoring the moment of absolute control. He did not open it. He did not need to. He believed he had already won. "Oh, I will leave you alone, Evelyn," Brad said softly, his smile widening. "But your resignation does not take effect until the end of the business day. We have a massive presentation this morning, and the board is expecting to see the entire team represented, including the junior staff." I looked up at him, feigning shock. "You cannot make me go in there. I can, and I am." Brad replied, his tone hardening into a command. "You are going to walk into that boardroom. You are going to distribute the printed portfolios to the Vanguard executives, and then you are going to stand in the back corner and operate the slide clicker for my presentation." My stomach churned, a genuine reaction to the sheer depth of his cruelty. It was not enough for him to steal my project, destroy my reputation, and extort me out of my job. He needed to humiliate me publicly. He needed to parade me in front of the corporate elite as a defeated servant. He wanted to break my spirit so completely that I would never dare to rebuild it. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You already have the code. You have my signature. What more do you want?" Brad leaned in so close I could feel his breath against my cheek. "I want you to watch." He whispered, his eyes gleaming with a malicious thrill. "I want you to stand in the corner and watch me sell your brilliant idea to the most powerful men in this city. I want you to watch them applaud me, shake my hand, and hand me the promotion you bled for. I want you to witness exactly how insignificant you are in the grand scheme of things." He stepped back, adjusting his silk tie and smoothing the lapels of his suit. "Grab the boxes of portfolios from the staging room, Evelyn. The investors are taking their seats. Do not drop anything." He turned and strode through the glass doors into the boardroom, leaving me alone in the corridor. A junior analyst rushed past me, carrying a tray of water bottles, oblivious to the extortion that had just occurred. I stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath, allowing the cool air of the corridor to fill my lungs. The humiliation burned a hot, suffocating sensation in the back of my throat. Brad had designed this moment to break me. He believed that forcing me to act as his silent assistant would be the ultimate punishment. He had no idea that he had just handed me a front-row seat to his own execution. I walked into the staging room and picked up 2 heavy boxes filled with the glossy, spiral-bound presentation portfolios. The cover page featured the Apex logo, bold and arrogant, with Bradley Vance printed underneath as the lead architect. I carried the boxes into the boardroom. The room was vast, dominated by a massive mahogany table that stretched 20 feet across. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the gray morning light casting long shadows across the polished wood. The Vanguard executives sat on one side of the table, an imposing row of men and women in dark suits, their expressions unreadable and assessing. The Sterling Financial Managing Partners sat opposite them. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling, the founder and chief executive officer. He was a man in his late 60s possessing a quiet, terrifying authority. He did not speak. He merely watched the room, his hands folded neatly in front of him, a sleek tablet resting near his elbow. I moved silently around the perimeter of the table. I placed a glossy portfolio in front of each executive, aligning the edges perfectly with their water glasses. I did not make eye contact. I kept my movements precise and invisible, exactly as a low-level assistant was expected to behave. As I placed a portfolio in front of Mr. Sterling, I noticed a faint notification light blinking on his tablet. The email Jamal had sent in the middle of the night had landed. Mr. Sterling knew. I finished distributing the materials and retreated to the back corner of the room near the audio-visual control panel. I stood in the shadows, blending into the dark wood paneling, clutching the wireless slide clicker in my hand. Brad took his position at the front of the room, standing beside the massive projection screen. He surveyed the seated executives with a practiced, confident smile. He looked directly at me standing in the corner and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A command to begin. I pressed the button on the clicker. The projection screen flared to life, displaying the title slide, Apex Predictive Risk Modeling. Brad cleared his throat, commanding the attention of the room. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bradley Vance, and I am the lead architect behind the Apex initiative. Over the past 6 months, I have worked tirelessly to develop a risk forecasting algorithm that will fundamentally alter how Sterling Financial identifies and mitigates market vulnerabilities. He spoke with undeniable charisma. He hit every buzzword, projecting an image of a visionary tech leader. He paced the front of the room, gesturing expansively toward the screen. As he spoke, I pressed the clicker, advancing the slides exactly on cue. I watched him claim credit for the late nights I had spent debugging the neural networks. I listened to him summarize the complex mathematical regressions I had built while lying in a hospital bed recovering from heart surgery. He painted a picture of his own genius, and for the first 10 minutes the executives appeared captivated. They flipped through the portfolios, nodding in agreement, as Brad outlined projected revenue increases and risk reduction metrics. He was putting on a masterclass in corporate salesmanship. I stood completely still in the corner, gripping the plastic clicker. The humiliation Brad had intended for me was entirely absent. Instead, a cold, crystalline calm washed over me. I watched him perform his victory lap, knowing with absolute certainty that every word he spoke was a nail in his own coffin. I did not feel small. I felt like a sniper waiting for the target to step into the crosshairs. The presentation was proceeding flawlessly, but the trap I had set required a specific trigger, and I knew exactly when the investors would pull it. Brad commanded the boardroom with the practiced ease of a seasoned actor who had memorized his script flawlessly. He strutted back and forth across the front of the room, his voice resonating with manufactured passion. He was not just pitching a software program. He was pitching himself as a visionary, the irreplaceable asset that Vanguard Holdings desperately needed to acquire. The architecture of Apex represents a paradigm shift in financial forecasting. Brad announced, raising his hands to emphasize the scale of his supposed achievement. We are no longer relying on static historical models. I have integrated advanced artificial intelligence dynamics and quantum simulation protocols to create a system that anticipates market volatility before it registers on conventional indices. He paused, letting the heavy, impressive-sounding jargon wash over the room. The terms were largely meaningless buzzwords, strung together to sound sophisticated, but in a room full of finance executives who cared more about profit margins than programming syntax. The illusion worked. The Vanguard directors nodded approvingly, jotting notes in the margins of their glossy portfolios. I stood in the dim corner of the room, my finger resting lightly on the slide clicker. I pressed the button, advancing the presentation to a complex flowchart detailing the data ingestion process. Brad turned to the screen, gesturing toward a series of intricate nodes I had spent 3 weeks designing. Building this infrastructure was not a 9-to-5 endeavor. Brad continued, lowering his voice to convey a sense of personal sacrifice. It required late nights, weekends, and an obsessive dedication to the architecture. I spent countless hours here in the office writing and rewriting every single line of code, ensuring that the machine learning modules operated with absolute precision. My jaw tightened so forcefully my teeth ached. He was standing in front of 20 executives, casually appropriating my exhaustion, my dedication, and my intellect. He was claiming the late nights I had spent staring at a monitor while my chest throbbed with post-surgical pain. I was stealing the very essence of my professional identity and wearing it like a tailored suit. To the investors, he looked like a dedicated corporate prodigy. To me, he was a parasite feeding on the labor he was entirely incapable of producing himself. He glanced toward my dark corner of the room, offering a brief, almost imperceptible smirk. He wanted to ensure I was absorbing every agonizing second of his triumph. He was relishing the power dynamic, forcing the true architect to act as a silent, obedient stagehand while he received the standing ovation. I kept my face utterly blank. I did not glare. I did not flinch. I absorbed the humiliation, letting it fuel the cold, mechanical precision required for what was about to happen. The anger that should have consumed me had crystallized into a profound tactical patience. I was not just a victim enduring a public execution. I was the architect who had rigged the stage with explosives. Brad transitioned smoothly to the financial projections, projecting massive revenue increases and unprecedented risk mitigation. The Sterling Financial Managing Partners beamed with pride, clearly thrilled that their golden boy was dazzling the buyers and cementing the acquisition. Linda from Human Resources sat near the back, nodding slightly, her face projecting quiet validation for her nephew's success. The performance was airtight. Brad had memorized the high-level summaries and the marketing bullet points perfectly. He painted a masterpiece of corporate innovation, and for 30 minutes he held the entire room in the palm of his hand. But a presentation is a controlled environment. A slide deck is a predetermined path. The true test of a developer lies not in the pitch, but in the interrogation. As Brad concluded his final slide, the screen shifted to a stark professional logo. He clasped his hands together and offered a confident, welcoming smile. "That concludes the architectural overview of Apex," Brad said, his tone exuding total control. "I am incredibly proud of the system I have built, and I believe it will be the cornerstone of our combined future. I would now like to open the floor to any questions the Vanguard due diligence team might have regarding the core functionality." He gestured expansively toward the long mahogany table, inviting the scrutiny he believed he could easily deflect. He was expecting questions about implementation timelines, server costs, and integration strategies. He was expecting the surface-level inquiries of financial managers. He was not expecting a surgical strike from a technical auditor. At the far end of the table, a Vanguard executive leaned forward. He was an older man with sharp, assessing eyes and a demeanor completely devoid of corporate pleasantries. He did not look at the glossy portfolio in front of him. He looked directly at Brad. "Mr. Vance." The executive began, his voice cutting through the lingering applause like a scalpel. "The predictive yields you outlined are impressive. However, my technical team reviewed the preliminary architecture summaries you provided last week." Brad's smile remained fixed, though his posture stiffened marginally. "Absolutely. I am happy to clarify any high-level architectural concepts. I do not need high-level concepts," the executive countered, adjusting his glasses. "I need to understand the foundational logic. In a volatile market scenario, historical data often introduces significant noise leading to false positive risk alerts. Can you explain the specific time series regression logic you coded into the core module to filter out anomalous data spikes without compromising the predictive speed of the neural network?" The boardroom went dead silent. The question was not a marketing inquiry. It was a deep, highly specific technical challenge that struck at the very heart of the algorithm complex mathematical foundation. It was a question only the true architect could answer. Brad's smile vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray. He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. The smooth, charismatic orator who had dominated the room seconds ago was suddenly paralyzed. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white, as he desperately searched his memory for a buzzword that might suffice. He had no answer. He did not know the regression logic because he did not write a single line of the code. He was a fraud standing under a spotlight, and the audience had just asked him to prove he could actually sing. The silence stretched agonizing and heavy. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The Vanguard executives exchanged quick, concerned glances. The Sterling managing partners shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, the triumphant atmosphere evaporating instantly. "Well," Brad stammered, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "The regression logic is a highly proprietary blend of variables. We utilize a multi-tiered filtering process to ensure the data integrity remains robust." He was stalling, throwing out generic phrases in a frantic attempt to build a bridge over a chasm he could not cross. The Vanguard executive frowned, clearly unimpressed by the evasion. "That does not answer the question, Mr. Vance. I am asking about the specific mathematical mechanism you employed to handle the noise filtration. If you built this model, you should be able to explain the core logic you coded." Panic seized Brad entirely. His eyes darted around the room, frantic and wild like a cornered animal looking for an exit. He looked at the Sterling partners, finding only confusion. He looked at Linda, who offered nothing but a tense, panicked stare. Finally, his eyes found me standing in the dark corner of the room. The arrogance and malice were completely gone, replaced by sheer, naked terror. He was sending out a silent, desperate SOS. He needed me to save him. He needed the lowly assistant he had extorted and humiliated to throw him a lifeline before his entire career imploded in front of the most important men in the company. He raised a trembling hand and pointed a finger in my direction. "Actually," Brad said, his voice cracking slightly as he scrambled to shift the focus. "The intricate back-end details are quite dense. My technical assistant, Evelyn, is intimately familiar with the raw data entry protocols. She can run a quick simulation on the terminal to visually demonstrate the noise filtration mechanism for you." He gestured frantically for me to approach the front of the room. He was trying to use me as a human shield, hoping I would step up to the laptop, pull up a visual graph, and distract the executives from his catastrophic failure. He was relying on my fear, assuming the threat of the non-disclosure agreement and the resignation letter would force me to cover for his incompetence. I did not hesitate. I released my grip on the slide clicker, letting it rest on the audiovisual cart. I stepped out of the shadows and walked slowly, deliberately toward the front of the boardroom. The eyes of every executive in the room tracked my movement. Brad let out a visible breath of relief, stepping back from the podium and wiping the sweat from his brow. He thought I was coming to his rescue. He thought his extortion had held firm. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed the detonator directly to the architect of his destruction. The click of my low heels against the polished hardwood floor sounded disproportionately loud in the heavy, expectant silence of the boardroom. I moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. I did not look at the Sterling managing partners, nor did I glance at the Vanguard executives. My gaze remained fixed on the sleek laptop resting on the podium. Brad took a hasty step back, practically shoving himself out of my way. He offered a strained, tight smile to the investors, attempting to project the image of a benevolent leader, allowing his subordinate a moment to shine. The sheer panic radiating from his rigid posture told a completely different story. I reached the podium and placed my hands flat on either side of the keyboard. The laptop was connected directly to the massive projection screen behind me. Brad had left a superficial data visualization running a meaningless web of colorful nodes designed to dazzle rather than inform. I did not touch the mousepad to pull up a chart. I did not open a spreadsheet to run a simulation. I looked up and met the gaze of the veteran Vanguard executive who had initiated the interrogation. His eyes were sharp, evaluating me not as a silent assistant, but as the sudden focal point of a rapidly deteriorating presentation. To properly address the mechanics of the noise filtration within a volatile time series regression, I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the expansive room. We cannot rely on superficial front-end visualizations. We need to query the core logic directly through the back-end terminal. The Vanguard executive nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses. Proceed. Brad shifted his weight nervously behind me. Evelyn, he hissed, his voice a frantic whisper meant only for my ears. Just show them the diagnostic graph. Do not open the command prompt." I ignored him entirely. I focused my attention on the keyboard. My fingers found the keys falling into the familiar rapid cadence of a developer writing code. I bypassed the polished graphic user interface Brad had been relying on all morning. I pulled up the raw black command terminal. The projection screen behind me mirrored the action, transforming from a colorful chart into a stark, unforgiving void of black space and a blinking white cursor. A murmur of confusion rippled through the Sterling executives. This was not part of the rehearsed demonstration. I began typing. I did not enter a standard diagnostic command. I inputted the specific, highly complex string of market variables and historical risk metrics I had engineered the night before. I typed the precise sequence designed to trigger the dormant cryptographic signature buried deep within the Apex architecture. "What are you doing, Evelyn?" Brad demanded, his voice rising in pitch, the panic no longer concealed. "That is not the simulation protocol. Stop typing." He reached out his hand, grasping for my shoulder to pull me away from the podium. I did not flinch. I did not look back. I hit the enter key. The command executed. The digital payload I had woven into the very fabric of the algorithm recognized the unique query. The system froze. For a fraction of a second, the blinking white cursor vanished. Then the entire projection screen flashed a violent, blinding crimson red. The collective gasp from the boardroom was immediate. Several executives jolted backward in their heavy leather chairs. Brad staggered back, his face twisting in absolute horror as the crimson light washed over his expensive suit. The red screen held for 2 seconds before a massive, unavoidable block of white text snapped into the center of the display. The font was large, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. Proprietary algorithm ownership verified. Original architect Evelyn, date of inception, February 14th. Warning: unauthorized access detected. The message pulsed rhythmically on the massive screen, casting a harsh, rhythmic red glow across the faces of the most powerful financial executives in Chicago. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, and total. I stepped away from the laptop. I turned slowly, my expression completely neutral, and faced the boardroom. Brad let out a strangled, breathless sound. He lunged toward the podium, shoving me aside with frantic, uncoordinated force. He hammered his fingers against the laptop keyboard, desperately hitting the escape key, mashing the control and delete buttons, trying to force close the terminal. The screen did not budge. The watermark I had coded was not a superficial pop-up. It was a lockdown protocol embedded in the core architecture. It had seized control of the graphic interface and disabled all peripheral inputs. The system was paralyzed, projecting the undeniable truth of its authorship to the entire room. "This is a glitch," Brad shouted, his voice cracking hysterically. The red light reflected in the sweat beading on his forehead. "It is a virus. She infected the presentation with a virus. She is a disgruntled employee. She is trying to sabotage the merger." He looked wildly at the Sterling managing partners, begging for them to intervene, begging for the shield of corporate nepotism to protect him one last time. But the shield was gone. Linda, the human resources director, sat frozen in her chair, her face drained of all color, staring at the screen in mute terror. The Vanguard executive at the far end of the table did not look at Brad. He did not look at the frantic attempts to reboot the laptop. He slowly removed his glasses, placed them deliberately on the mahogany table, and turned his gaze toward the head of the boardroom. Mr. Sterling had not moved since the presentation began. The founder of the company sat perfectly still, his hands folded, his eyes fixed intensely on the pulsing red screen. The notification light on his tablet, which had been blinking all morning, was now solid. The silence stretched until the Vanguard executive finally broke it. His voice was no longer analytical. It was lethal. "Mr. Sterling," the executive said, his tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Vanguard Holdings was assured that the technology underpinning this acquisition was the sole intellectual property of Sterling Financial, developed by the lead architect presenting today. He pointed a rigid finger at the projection screen. "The message currently locking down your flagship algorithm suggests a severe discrepancy regarding authorship and proprietary rights." Brad slammed the laptop shut with a violent crack. The projection screen went instantly black, but the damage was irreversible. The words were burned into the retinas of every person in the room. "It is a lie!" Brad yelled, his voice echoing shrilly in the sudden darkness. She is mentally unstable. We put her on a performance plan yesterday because she deleted a multi-million-dollar client database. Ask Linda. Ask HR. She is trying to extort this company." He was clinging to the narrative he had fabricated, hoping the lie was sturdy enough to withstand the impact of the digital watermark. He did not realize that the Vanguard executive was not relying on a screen prompt to make his assessment. The Vanguard executive ignored Brad completely. He kept his eyes locked on Mr. Sterling. "We require an immediate explanation," the executive demanded. "If Sterling Financial is attempting to sell stolen intellectual property, Vanguard Holdings will terminate these acquisition negotiations effectively immediately." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. A billion-dollar merger, the culmination of months of negotiation and due diligence, was teetering on the edge of collapse because a mediocre executive had tried to steal a project he could not comprehend. Brad turned toward Mr. Sterling, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of pleading. "Sir, please, you have to believe me. I built Apex. She is a saboteur." Mr. Sterling finally moved. He reached out and picked up the sleek tablet resting near his elbow. He did not look at the panicked man sweating at the front of the room. He did not look at the furious Vanguard executives. He slowly swiped his finger across the screen, unlocking the device. The entire room held its breath. The fate of the company, the acquisition and Brad's entire career rested on the words of the man sitting at the head of the table. Mr. Sterling tapped the screen once, opening the secure email that had been sitting in his inbox since 3 in the morning. He read the contents silently, his expression an impenetrable fortress of corporate authority. The silence was agonizing, a physical pressure building within the glass walls of the boardroom. I stood calmly near the podium, my pulse steady, watching the executioner review the evidence I had provided. The rhythmic click of my low heels against the polished hardwood floor sounded distinct and deliberate in the heavy, expectant quiet of the executive boardroom. I stepped out from the dark, recessed corner near the audio-visual cart, abandoning my role as the invisible stagehand. I moved with a slow, measured pace toward the front of the room, keeping my posture straight and my gaze elevated. Brad let out a harsh, ragged exhale as I approached the podium. The sound was a manifestation of profound relief. He took a hasty step backward, clearing the space in front of the sleek silver laptop connected to the main projection feed. He offered a strained, tight smile to the seated investors, attempting to project the image of a benevolent leader, allowing his technical subordinate a moment to assist him. But the sheer panic radiating from his rigid shoulders told a different story. As I stepped up to the keyboard, he leaned in close, his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp, acrid scent of his nervous sweat. "Pull up the diagnostic graphs." Brad hissed, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper meant only for my ears. "Use the front-end interface. Fix this right now." He thought his extortion had held firm. He thought the threat of the non-disclosure agreement and the forced resignation letter had broken my spirit. He assumed I was stepping up to that podium to act as his human shield, to throw out a distraction and save his career from the probing questions of the Vanguard due diligence team. I did not nod. I did not acknowledge his whisper. I placed my hands flat on either side of the keyboard, the cool aluminum chassis grounding me. I bypassed Brad entirely, lifting my eyes to meet the gaze of the veteran Vanguard executive at the far end of the 20-foot mahogany table. The older man leaned forward, his pen hovering over his legal pad, waiting for the assistant to provide a diversion. To fully understand this mechanism, I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the expansive room. My tone carried no subservience. It lacked the hesitant, deferential pitch of a junior employee addressing a room of corporate titans. It was crisp, resonant, and unapologetic. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Several managing partners stopped shuffling their papers and looked up, their brows furrowing at the sudden change in dynamics. We cannot rely on superficial visual aids. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on the Vanguard executive. To answer your question regarding the noise filtration protocols, we need to query the core source code directly. I dropped my gaze to the laptop. I did not touch the trackpad to navigate through Brad-polished presentation software. My fingers found the keys, falling into the familiar, rapid cadence of a systems architect writing raw syntax. I utilized a keyboard shortcut to force close the graphic user interface. The massive projection screen behind me shifted instantly. The colorful corporate slide deck dissolved, replaced by a stark, unforgiving black terminal window. A single white cursor blinked in the upper left corner. Brad shifted his weight, his leather shoes scraping against the floorboards. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" he demanded, his whisper rising in pitch. "That is not the simulation interface." I ignored him. My fingers flew across the mechanical keys in a rapid, unbroken rhythm. I did not input a standard diagnostic command. I typed a specific, highly complex string of market variables, historical risk metrics, and alphanumeric characters. It was a 54-character override sequence, a ghost protocol, encrypted into the genesis blocks of the Apex architecture. It was a sequence that only the true creator of the system could possibly know. The clacking of the keyboard echoed sharply in the silent room. Brad leaned closer, his eyes darting from the laptop screen to the projection on the wall. He realized I was not opening a chart. He recognized the raw terminal code spooling across the display. The confusion on his face morphed into dawning terror. "Stop typing!" Brad commanded, his facade cracking. He reached out his fingers, grazing the fabric of my blazer, a frantic attempt to pull me away from the console. I did not flinch. I did not look back. I hit the enter key. The execution was instantaneous. The black terminal window vanished. The overhead projector cast a blinding, brilliant crimson hue across the length of the boardroom table. The sudden violent shift in color bathed the faces of the New York investors and the sterling managing partners in a harsh emergency glare. The polished mahogany surface reflected the red light, transforming the elegant corporate meeting space into the visual equivalent of a digital crime scene. A stark, brutal interface dominated the display. There were no corporate logos. There were no sleek marketing graphics. A jagged, unyielding block of white text snapped into the center of the crimson screen. The font was large, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. Proprietary algorithm ownership verified. Original architect Evelyn. Inception date 02/14. Warning: unauthorized access detected. The message pulsed rhythmically on the massive screen, a digital heartbeat demanding the attention of every person in the room. The boardroom fell into a profound vacuum of sound. The ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade away. 20 elite financial strategists stared at the wall, their postures rigid, processing the irrefutable confession projected before them. The meticulously crafted narrative of the brilliant young executive shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces in a fraction of a second. I stepped back from the podium. I turned slowly, my expression neutral, and faced the room. The silence broke with the sound of a tailored suit pulling at the seams. Brad let out a strangled, breathless gasp. His eyes bulged, the whites stark against his suddenly flushed skin. His jaw unhinged, a silent scream of sheer, naked panic forming on his lips. The flight or fight response hijacked his nervous system. He lunged at the podium. He shoved his shoulder into mine, a frantic, uncoordinated physical push to gain access to the laptop. I stepped aside gracefully, allowing him to throw himself over the console. He hammered his hands down on the keyboard. He slammed the escape key repeatedly, the plastic clicking frantically under his desperate strikes. His fingers scraped across the trackpad, trying to locate a cursor that no longer existed. "Turn it off!" Brad gasped, his voice shrill and ragged, stripped of all its previous baritone confidence. He pressed the power button, holding it down with a shaking thumb, desperate to kill the machine and sever the feed. The laptop ignored the physical input. The digital watermark I had engineered the night before was not a simple graphical overlay. It was a root-level encryption lock. Upon receiving the trigger sequence, the payload had bypassed the operating system and seized control of the motherboard firmware. The machine was now a brick capable only of displaying the unyielding truth of its ownership. Brad realized the hardware was entirely unresponsive. In a final act of unhinged desperation, he slammed the laptop lid shut with a sharp, echoing crack that rang through the silent room like a gunshot. He stood up, chest heaving, his silk tie knocked askew, breathing heavily through his mouth. He thought closing the lid would end the nightmare. He did not understand the audiovisual infrastructure of an executive boardroom. The projection server was independent of the laptop internal display mechanism. Closing the physical lid did not sever the HDMI feed to the wall projector. The crimson screen remained blazing on the wall directly behind him. The stark white text continued to pulse, casting a red halo around his trembling silhouette. Unauthorized access detected. Brad slowly turned his head, looking over his shoulder at the wall. The red light washed over his face, highlighting the beads of sweat rolling down his temples. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. There was no hiding. There was no spinning this failure into a success. He slowly turned back to face the long table. 20 pairs of eyes were pinned on him. The Vanguard executives stared with cold, unforgiving judgment. The Sterling managing partners looked at him with a mixture of shock and dawning fury. Linda from Human Resources sat frozen in her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her face drained of all color. Brad stood exposed before the most powerful men in his industry, bathed in the flashing red light of his own theft. He had tried to steal an empire he did not understand, and the architect had just locked the gates and set the throne on fire. The room waited, the silence stretching into an unbearable eternity for the executioner to speak. The oppressive silence in the boardroom fractured. The veteran Vanguard executive removed his reading glasses, placing them deliberately onto the polished mahogany table. The gesture was precise, final, conveying a total withdrawal of confidence. He did not look at the frantic man sweating by the podium. He directed his gaze toward the head of the table. Mr. Sterling, the Vanguard executive, stated his tone, dropping into a cold, clinical register that commanded the attention of the entire room. The due diligence protocols executed by Vanguard Holdings were predicated on the assurance that the core intellectual property underpinning this acquisition was proprietary to Sterling Financial and developed by the lead architect presenting today. He gestured toward the crimson projection screen still flashing ominously behind Brad. The security alert currently locking down your flagship algorithm suggests a catastrophic discrepancy regarding authorship and ownership rights. If Sterling Financial is attempting to facilitate the sale of stolen intellectual property, Vanguard Holdings will suspend these acquisition negotiations effectively immediately. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. $1 billion merger, months of intricate legal maneuvering, and millions in projected partner bonuses were teetering on the edge of annihilation because a mediocre executive had attempted to claim credit for a project he could not even begin to comprehend. At the head of the long table, Mr. Sterling remained perfectly still. The founder of the firm sat with his hands folded, his posture radiating the terrifying calm of a predator assessing a wounded animal. He had founded this company 40 years ago. He had navigated market crashes, hostile takeovers, and federal investigations. I was a titan of Chicago finance, and he did not tolerate liability. Brad scrambled to regain control, his survival instinct overriding logic. He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward, addressing the room with a voice shrill with panic. "It is a glitch." Brad stammered the words, tumbling over each other. "It is a virus. She infected the presentation terminal with a malicious virus. She is a disgruntled employee. We placed her on a performance improvement plan yesterday because her behavior had become erratic. She is trying to sabotage the merger out of spite." He pointed a shaking finger at me, standing impassively near the wall. I remained silent. "Ask Human Resources," Brad pleaded, looking wildly down the table. "Ask Linda. She has the documentation. Evelyn deleted a multi-million-dollar client database yesterday just to cause chaos. This entire display is extortion." He was clinging to the narrative he had fabricated, hoping the lie was sturdy enough to withstand the impact of the digital watermark. He assumed the corporate machinery would instinctively protect a senior manager over a technical assistant. He assumed nepotism would shield him from the fallout. He did not realize that the Vanguard executive was not relying solely on a flashing screen prompt to make his assessment, nor did he realize the true danger sitting at the head of the table. Mr. Sterling slowly raised his right hand, silencing Brad mid-sentence. The gesture was minimal, requiring almost no effort, yet it instantly stifled the frantic protestations coming from the front of the room. The CEO lowered his hand and fixed his gaze directly on Brad. The intensity in his eyes was lethal. Mr. Vance Sterling began, his voice surprisingly soft, lacking any trace of an echo, a calm that signaled absolute devastation. "Did you build this original model? Answer the question." Brad swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. A fresh bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the crimson light from the screen. Yes, sir. I architected the core logic over the past 6 months. The anomaly on the screen is a cyber attack. I can have the security team purge the system and retrieve the clean version. Mr. Sterling did not blink. He slowly reached across the table and picked up a thick, unmarked manila folder that had been resting near his elbow since the meeting began. The heavy paper snapped loudly as he opened it, withdrawing a dense stack of printed documents. He held up the first page. It was covered in dense microscopic text rows of alphanumeric data strings separated by strict margins. "You will not require the security team to purge the system, Mr. Vance," Sterling stated, his voice dropping into a harsh, unforgiving cadence, "because the security team has already been active." He tossed the first page onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping near the center. "I received an anonymous encrypted intelligence packet at 3:15 this morning." Sterling continued, picking up the next page. It contained highly specific allegations regarding severe intellectual property theft and unauthorized server manipulation within the analytics division. Brad's mouth opened slightly, a sharp intake of breath snagging in his chest. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. "Given the gravity of the impending Vanguard acquisition, I do not rely on assumptions." Sterling set his eyes boring into Brad. "I do not rely on the assurances of human resources. I authorize the Chief Information Security Officer to conduct an immediate independent forensic sweep of the division mainframe, pulling the raw server logs directly from the cloud backups." The audit concluded an hour before this meeting commenced. He slammed the stack of documents down onto the mahogany table. The sharp crack echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot. "The forensic logs confirm that you have not authored a single line of code in the past 6 months." Sterling's voice rose, echoing off the glass walls, a commanding roar that silenced the room completely. "You logged into the primary directory at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning, utilizing your executive clearance to forcibly revoke Evelyn administrative access and alter the ownership metadata on the Apex repository." Brad staggered back a half step, bumping into the projection screen. The red light washed over his horrified expression. "Sir, I can explain the file transfers. We were consolidating the directories." "You will be quiet," Sterling commanded, pointing a rigid finger at him. "You did not merely consolidate files. The independent audit pulled the hardware identification logs for the Harrison Trust database deletion. The command did not originate from Evelyn Workstation. The system traces the exact keystrokes back to the terminal located in your executive suite." A collective gasp swept through the Sterling managing partners. The Vanguard executives exchanged grim, confirming glances. The narrative was collapsing, exposing the rotten core beneath. "You spoofed a junior analyst credentials to permanently wipe a Tier 1 client account, causing millions in deliberate damages, all to construct a fraudulent narrative of instability to facilitate her termination." Sterling leaned forward, his knuckles resting on the documents. "You committed corporate espionage against your own firm to conceal the theft of a colleague intellectual property. The payoff was total and absolute." Mr. Sterling had not been fooled by the tailored suit or the smooth rhetoric. Armed with the irrefutable evidence Jamal had provided, the CEO had executed a rapid, lethal investigation in the dark hours of the morning. The digital footprints Brad thought he had erased were currently sitting on the conference table, printed in black and white. I stood near the door, my heart beating a steady, victorious rhythm. The trap had sprung, not just closing around Brad, but crushing him entirely under the weight of the corporate hierarchy he had worshipped. Linda, sitting near the middle of the table, looked physically ill. She stared at the forensic reports, her hands trembling. She realized instantly that her nepotistic cover-up was now exposed to the founder of the firm. Brad looked wildly around the room, his eyes frantic, searching for an ally, an excuse, an exit. The charismatic leader who had commanded the room 20 minutes prior was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered man facing the absolute ruin of his life. He looked at me, standing impassively near the wall. He did not issue a threat. He did not offer an excuse. He just stared, the realization finally dawning that he had underestimated the architect, and the architect had just leveled his entire empire. Mr. Sterling did not linger on the sight of the ruined executive trembling at the front of the room. He turned his attention back to the Vanguard partners, his demeanor shifting from wrathful to strictly professional. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this unprecedented disruption," Sterling said, addressing the New York investors. "Sterling Financial maintains a zero-tolerance policy for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. The situation is being rectified immediately, and the proprietary integrity of the Apex algorithm remains securely within our control, authored by the true architect." He did not wait for a response. He reached over to the sleek console embedded in the mahogany table and pressed a single button. "Security to the executive boardroom." Sterling spoke into the intercom. "Immediate assistance required." Within 30 seconds, the heavy glass doors swung open. 2 security officers' men built like linebackers in dark suits stepped into the room. They assessed the situation instantly, their eyes tracking from the CEO to the man sweating profusely near the podium. "Escort Mr. Vance from the premises." Sterling commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He is terminated for cause effective immediately. He is to be denied access to his office. His personal effects will be mailed to him, and his corporate credentials are to be deactivated before he reaches the lobby." The guards moved with swift, practiced efficiency. They flanked Brad, grabbing him firmly by the upper arms. The physical contact broke whatever spell of denial had paralyzed him. "Wait!" Brad shouted, his voice cracking, pitching an octave higher as he struggled against the grip of the guards. "Sir, please, you cannot do this. We can manage the optics. The acquisition is too important. I can sign a non-disclosure agreement. I can walk away quietly." He was bargaining with the very weapon he had used to extort me just 24 hours ago. He believed the corporate machinery would still protect him if he offered to disappear. He did not grasp the magnitude of the line he had crossed. "You will not be walking away quietly, Mr. Vance," Sterling replied, watching the guards haul Brad toward the exit. "The legal department is currently preparing a civil suit for the financial damages resulting from the Harrison Trust sabotage. Furthermore, the findings of the forensic audit have already been forwarded to federal authorities. You will be facing prosecution for wire fraud and the theft of intellectual property. You are a profound liability to this institution." The reality of his destruction finally settled over Brad. The tailored suit, the executive presence, the impending promotion to vice president, all of it evaporated. He was facing federal prison. The guards dragged him backward toward the glass doors. "Evelyn!" Brad screamed, his voice turning ragged and desperate. "Evelyn, tell them we collaborated. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please." He locked eyes with me as they pulled him past the spot where I stood. The arrogance that had defined every interaction we shared was gone, replaced by a pathetic, clawing terror. I did not step forward. I did not nod. I maintained unbroken eye contact, my expression completely blank, watching the architect of my torment beg for a lifeline I had no intention of throwing. The heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing out his shouts. The click of the latch echoed through the silent boardroom, finalizing his exit from the corporate world. The atmosphere in the room remained charged thick with the adrenaline of the sudden execution. Mr. Sterling picked up the stack of forensic reports, tapping the edges against the table to align them. He turned his gaze toward the center of the table. "Linda," Sterling said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. The director of human resources flinched. She sat rigidly in her chair, clutching her silver pen. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. You processed a performance improvement plan for Evelyn yesterday afternoon," he stated, referencing the documents in front of him. "You authorized severe disciplinary action based on the recommendation of a project lead who happened to be your nephew, without conducting an independent investigation into the claims of data sabotage." Linda swallowed hard, her pristine facade crumbling. "Sir, I followed standard disciplinary protocols. The logs appeared to indicate you prioritized nepotism over compliance." Sterling cut her off sharply. "You facilitated the termination of a critical asset to protect a fraudulent executive. You are suspended indefinitely without pay, pending a full review of your departmental conduct. Surrender your badge and leave the building." Linda opened her mouth to protest, but the look in Sterling eyes silenced her instantly. She stood up, her hands trembling, placed her corporate identification badge on the mahogany table, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. In the span of 5 minutes, the CEO had surgically removed the infection threatening his company. The room exhaled a collective breath. The Vanguard executives shifted in their seats, the tension easing slightly now that the liabilities had been neutralized. Mr. Sterling turned his attention to me. He gestured toward the empty chair, to his immediate right the seat of honor at the head of the table. "Evelyn, please sit down." Sterling said, his tone shifting from wrathful to respectful. I walked over to the table and took the seat. I placed my hands in my lap, feeling the soft fabric of my blazer. I had entered the room anticipating a battle for survival. I was now sitting beside the founder of the firm. "I owe you an apology." Sterling began speaking loudly enough for the entire boardroom to hear. "This institution failed to protect your intellectual property, and our internal safeguards were compromised by bad actors. You demonstrated extraordinary resilience in protecting the apex architecture when the system failed you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver pen. He slid a fresh blank legal pad toward me. "The position of Director of Data Analytics is currently vacant." Sterling continued, maintaining eye contact. "I am offering you the promotion immediately. The role comes with the executive salary tier. You have earned full creative control over the Apex initiative and a comprehensive stock option package designed to ensure your long-term retention with this firm." The offer was staggering. He was handing me the keys to the kingdom Brad had tried to steal, accompanied by a financial package that would obliterate my medical debt entirely and secure my future for decades. He was not just apologizing. He was buying my loyalty and ensuring that the true architect remained to steer the ship during the acquisition. Furthermore, Sterling added, his voice lowering slightly, "The firm will cover any outstanding legal or medical expenses incurred during this ordeal. Your focus needs to be entirely on the transition and the Vanguard integration." I looked at the blank legal pad. I looked at the powerful executives seated around the table waiting for my response. 24 hours ago, I had been locked in a windowless room, extorted and threatened with bankruptcy. Now the CEO was offering me the world to stay. I picked up the silver pen. "I accept the position, Mr. Sterling." I replied, my voice steady and clear. The Vanguard executive at the far end of the table nodded approvingly. The tension in the room finally broke, replaced by a renewed, focused energy. The acquisition was back on track. The presentation resumed this time, led by the actual creator of the algorithm. I spent the next 2 hours answering complex technical inquiries, breaking down the regression models, and demonstrating the true capability of Apex. The corporate victory was absolute. But as I finalized the meeting and accepted the handshakes of the investors, I knew the battle was only half won. Brad's professional life was over, but the personal fallout was waiting for me outside the glass walls of the Sterling Financial Building. The corporate execution had severed his career, but the shockwaves were racing straight toward the Oak Brook suburbs, and the family ambush was imminent. The news of the federal investigation moved through the financial district before the stock market even closed for the weekend. In the ruthless ecosystem of Chicago corporate finance, blood in the water attracts sharks, but a federal subpoena acts as a repellent. Brad was not simply fired. He was rendered radioactive. His corporate accounts were frozen pending the forensic review. His access to the building was revoked. The local business publications had already picked up the rumor of a severe compliance breach at Sterling Financial involving a senior manager. I spent my afternoon transitioning out of my narrow cubicle and moving my belongings into a corner office featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. The polished nameplate on the door already read, "Director of Data Analytics." I did not feel the crushing exhaustion that had plagued me for weeks. The heavy, suffocating weight pressing against my healing sternum had vanished, replaced by a profound electric clarity. The fallout reached the Oak Brook suburbs by mid-afternoon. A wedding funded by the illusion of impending wealth cannot survive the reality of imminent bankruptcy. Madison Dream Event, an extravagant affair reliant on Brad securing a vice president's salary and drawing upon his pristine credit, evaporated instantly. Vendors require scheduled deposits. Luxury estates do not extend grace periods to men facing federal indictment for wire fraud. The facade shattered with remarkable speed. I did not need to be present to know the exact trajectory of the panic. I knew my mother was likely making frantic calls trying to salvage the floral arrangements, trying to spin a narrative that would preserve her social standing among the country club elite. But you cannot spin a federal investigation. The truth had finally outrun the lie. I arrived at my apartment just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the brick buildings of my neighborhood. I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my home. The stack of unpaid medical bills still sat on the dining table, but they no longer represented a threat. My new compensation package included an immediate signing bonus that would clear every single debt by Monday morning. I walked into my bedroom, opened the closet, and bypassed the practical understated blazers I usually wore to blend into the background. I selected an emerald green silk dress, an elegant tailored garment I had purchased years ago but never found the occasion to wear. The fabric felt cool and luxurious against my skin. I applied a touch of makeup, arranged my hair, and paired the dress with classic black heels. Jamal had made reservations at a prestigious Michelin-starred restaurant in the West Loop to celebrate the victory. I was ready to leave the past behind. As I reached for my evening clutch, a frantic, hostile pounding rattled my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, entitled hammering of people who believed they owned my time and my compliance. I walked down the short hallway, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I checked the peephole. My mother and Madison stood in the corridor. Madison mascara was smeared down her cheeks, leaving dark, erratic streaks across her pale face. My mother's posture was rigid, her face flushed a mottled red, her signature pearl necklace looking tight around her throat. They had come to collect the scapegoat. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the heavy door open. I did not step aside to invite them inside. I stood perfectly centered in the doorway, a physical and unyielding barrier between my peaceful sanctuary and their relentless chaos. The contrast was striking. They looked erratic, disheveled, and desperate. I stood before them in emerald silk, poised and untroubled. "You have to drop the lawsuit," my mother screamed the moment she saw my face, her voice echoing shrilly down the quiet apartment corridor. "You have to call your chief executive officer right now and tell them it was all a mistake. Tell them you gave Brad permission to use the code." Madison pushed past our mother's shoulder, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "His lawyers said he could go to federal prison. The estate venue canceled our reservation because his credit cards were declined. You ruined my wedding. My entire life is destroyed because you could not just share credit on a computer project. You destroyed your sister's happiness because you are a cold-blooded, jealous failure." My mother shrieked. She raised her hand and clutched the fabric over her chest, preparing to deploy her usual theatrical display of cardiac distress. "How could you do this to your own family? The stress is going to give me a heart attack." I stood in the doorway, my expression neutral. The performance that used to paralyze me with guilt now looked like a cheap, poorly acted stage play. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a defensive explanation. I spoke with the cold, measured authority of a corporate director. I do not control the federal government. I stated my tone devoid of any emotion. Sterling Financial is pressing charges because Brad committed corporate espionage and intellectual property theft on the eve of a major acquisition. I am not the plaintiff. The United States Justice Department is. You cannot withdraw a federal indictment. You are a director now." My mother demanded, dropping her hand from her chest when she realized the medical emergency tactic was failing. "You have influence. You owe your sister this favor. We are your family. You have to fix this." "Family does not extort family," I replied, meeting her furious gaze. "Family does not demand $20,000 for a lobster dinner while I am drowning in medical debt from a heart surgery. Family does not threaten to strip away my health insurance to protect a thief. Brad dug his own grave. I merely handed him the shovel. I shifted my attention to Madison, the younger sister who had spent her entire life stepping on my shoulders to elevate herself. "You wanted a wealthy executive to fund your lifestyle." I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut bone. "You chose a criminal who is currently facing a decade behind bars. Choose better next time." My mother opened her mouth, her face contorting with a fresh wave of manufactured rage. Before she could summon another shriek, I delivered the final, non-negotiable verdict. "I did not destroy anyone," I said smoothly. "Criminals pay the price for their actions. And from this moment forward, neither of you has the right to step into my life again. Do not call me. Do not come to this building. You no longer exist to me." I stepped back into my apartment and shut the heavy door. The deadbolt engaged with a loud, definitive click right in their faces. Muffled shouts vibrated through the wood for a few minutes, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps down the hallway. The silence returned clean and unbroken. 30 minutes later, I walked through the mahogany doors of the Michelin-starred restaurant in the West Loop. The interior was a sanctuary of low ambient lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and the soft, sophisticated murmur of quiet jazz. The scent of roasted truffle and vintage wine filled the air. The hostess guided me through the elegant dining room toward a secluded corner booth. Jamal and Sarah were already seated reviewing the leather-bound menus. Jamal wore a sharp-tailored blazer, and Sarah looked radiant in a dark evening gown. They looked up as I approached their faces, breaking into warm, genuine smiles. Jamal stood and pulled out the chair for me. We ordered a rare vintage Bordeaux to start the evening. The sommelier poured the dark red wine into the crystal glasses. Jamal raised his glass, the ambient light catching the rim. To the true architect of Apex. Jamal said, his eyes conveying a deep, unspoken respect. To taking back the keys to the kingdom. I raised my glass, the crystal clinking softly against theirs. I took a slow sip. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted like unadulterated freedom. I looked around the beautiful restaurant surrounded by the only two family members who had ever truly seen my worth. There was no lingering hatred in my chest. There was no regret for the choices I had made. I had reclaimed my empire using the calculating, precise mindset required to survive in the modern American corporate landscape. I had built a fortress of undeniable data, drawn a line in the sand, and locked the heavy door on those who had proven themselves unworthy of standing beside me. The storm was over, and the future was entirely mine to write. I stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, watching the Chicago River cut a vibrant emerald path through the steel canyons of the financial district. Behind me, the Apex algorithm runs flawlessly across the monitors, a digital empire operating under my true name. The reflection staring back at me in the glass belongs to a director, a woman who stopped negotiating her worth and started dictating her terms. My heart beats in a steady, reliable rhythm against my surgical scar, serving as a quiet reminder that I survived the physical trauma and I outlasted the people who attempted to weaponize it. Walking away from my mother and sister did not leave a void in my life. It excavated a toxic foundation, allowing me to build a fortress in its place. Looking back at the wreckage of Brad's ruined career and the shattered illusion of my family, I carry three distinct truths. The first is that the concept of unconditional family loyalty is a manipulative trap designed to keep victims compliant. Biology is merely a coincidence, but loyalty is a currency earned through mutual respect. When you are asked to sacrifice your sanity, your finances, or your career to maintain a fragile peace, you are not being a peacemaker. You are funding your own destruction. I learned to sever the bloodline the exact moment it became a leash. The second truth resides in the cold, unyielding nature of data. In corporate warfare and toxic family dynamics alike, manipulators thrive on fabricated narratives. They twist reality-stage manufactured emotional crises and rely on the audience's willingness to believe a charismatic lie. But a narrative cannot survive a forensic audit. Documentation, timestamps, and server logs do not possess feelings. They do not care about a tailored suit or a tearful performance in a dining room. Always secure your evidence in silence. When you step into a battle against a liar, do not bring your emotions. Bring your receipts. The final truth is the most vital. Your inherent value is never determined by those who benefit from keeping you small. For years, I accepted my role as the invisible workhorse because I waited for validation from people fundamentally incapable of offering it. I realized that power is never handed to you at a mahogany conference table. You have to write your own code lock, your own doors, and confidently take the seat at the head of the table. You must be willing to become the villain in their fabricated story in order to become the hero of your own reality. We all have to face a boardroom or a dining table where someone tries to claim our hard work as their own. If you are sitting in the dark right now, gathering your own evidence and preparing your own exit, keep building. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to expose a manipulator in your life? Tell me your strategy in the comments below. If you found power in my victory, hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you turn on notifications for Hazel Tells Stories. We have plenty more battles to win, and I want you sitting right here in the front row for every